Game of Thrones, The Attack of the Northern Wolf. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 76 Determination. Robb. Sansa. Hearing the door open, Ed stood up. When he saw his children coming in, he shouted with joy, "Father!" Sansa saw her father and ran forward with excitement and threw herself into Ed's arms. Ed carefully stroked Sansa's red hair with his shackled hands, fearing that the chains on the shackles would accidentally hit his daughter. "Father, let's go. Time is urgent. We can talk about the past when it's safe. Come." "Sansa, move aside for a moment. I'll unlock the door for you." Robb leaned humping against the wall, took the key, and was about to unlock the door for addition. "No, Robb, I meant what I said to you before. Go find Arya, and then take your sisters back to the north." Hearing this, Ed shook his head at Robb with a serious face. "Father, stop talking about that bullshit honor. That thing is not worth even a copper coin. Do you know? In order to come to save you, more than a dozen brothers died in King's Landing, and they couldn't even bring their bodies back to the north. If you don't leave, their sacrifice will become meaningless. I know that you must be thinking about your life's honor and the honor of the Stark family, but have you ever thought about your mother? Have you ever thought about us? Father, I promise you, if you don't leave today, you will definitely die in King's Landing." Robb had no time to continue communicating with Eddard because of the jailer's shift change. Now seeing that he still insisted on not leaving, Robb suddenly yelled at Eddard in anger. "Brother, father." After leaving Eddard's arms, Sansa, who stood between the two, looked at the angry Robb and was a little at a loss. "You must take good care of the families of the warriors who sacrificed their lives to rescue me. As for death, Robb, I grew up with the warriors and have learned to face death. Go. Find Arya and take your sisters back to the north." Looking at Robb's angry face, Eddard sat back in the corner of the cell very calmly and spoke calmly. Looking at Eddard, who was unusually calm, Robb bit his gums hard. Veins on his forehead burst out, and his hands clenched into fists, suppressing his anger. Various thoughts flashed through his mind. Continue to persuade, knock him out, and take him away by force. Or just tell him that Joffrey will behead him? Finally, Robb took a deep breath, loosened his clenched fists, and said to Eddard, "Father, I respect your choice. Is there anything you want to say to Mother? Tell Cat I'm sorry." Looking at Eddard with a sad face, Sansa's eyes overflowed with tears. She said in a crying voice, "Father, please come back to Winterfell with us. Please, please. Sansa, let's go. No one can persuade my father to move him after he makes up his mind." Robb looked at Eddard, who closed his eyes and stopped talking. He pulled Sansa out of the cell. Eddard heard the footsteps of Robb and the others leaving. He opened his eyes and looked at their backs, his mouth slightly opened, but he still didn't say anything. 3 months ago, he had spent all his efforts to plan a rescue and buried the lives of more than a dozen brothers to come to the Black Prison. But Eddard would rather wait for death in King's Landing than return to the north with him. Robb, who was full of anger, took Sansa to the door of the Black Prison and kicked it open. Outside the gate of the Black Cell is a damp and dark blue stone staircase with a lighting torch at every distance. Going up the stairs, we came to the second floor of the dungeon. The second floor is a common fence-style prison. 6 jailers are sitting around a long table in the middle of the hall, preparing to have lunch. Seeing Robb coming up from the Black Cell with a sword, a jailer immediately drew out his long sword from his waist and ran straight towards Robb. Just in time. Robb, who wanted to find a place to vent his anger, rushed up with ice in his hand. The horror of the combination of the huge strength of his arms and the two-handed heavy sword ice made the jailer deeply understand it in his last moments. Looking at the jailer who bravely rushed up, Robb, who was full of anger, held the sword with both hands and chopped it down with all his strength. Clang! The jailer raised his long sword with both hands and collided with Robb's ice. The ice did not break the King's Landing sword. Compared with other steels, Valyrian steel is lighter, harder, and sharper. But more importantly, it has extraordinary qualities due to the magic spells cast with special techniques during the forging process. But in the era of declining magic, Valyrian steel weapons cannot cut iron like mud and are only slightly better than refined weapons. Back to the point, the jailer did block Robb's ice, but it was only for a brief moment. Robb's full body strength attached to the ice smashed the jailer's sword from the top of his head to the ground. The sharp tip of the ice cut straight from the jailer's forehead to his crotch. The jailer stood there expressionlessly. After a few seconds, a blood mark appeared from his forehead and reached his crotch. The jailer was like a mango cut in half, and all the broken organs inside fell to the ground. Although the long sword blocked the jailer and did not cut him in half, the horrific scene of being cut in half was even more bloody and terrifying. The second jailer who rushed up saw his companion being killed in one blow, and he immediately regretted that he rushed so fast. But he had already rushed in front of Robb, and there was no way to retreat, so he had to stab Robb with all his strength. Robb held the sword with both hands and blocked from bottom to top. After swinging away the opponent's long sword, the ice in his hand took advantage of the collision force and circled around his head and then slashed from top to bottom again. The jailer's right hand was so numb and weak that he had no time to raise his sword to resist and was directly cut into two by the ice. Puff. The remaining lower body of the jailer who was cut into immediately spurted out a lot of blood. Not only did it dye Robb red, but it also dyed Sansa, who was covering her mouth tightly behind him, red. The other three jailers saw Robb, the evil spirit, whose brutality in killing people was no less than that of the mountain. They were so scared that they turned around and ran to the first dungeon. Robb, who was venting his anger by killing two people in a row, saw the jailer in front of him who was chopped into two pieces with the prison key hanging on his head, so he stopped chasing him. "Lord Robb, you're okay, that's great." When he bent down to pick up the cell key, Eddard Stark was waving and shouting at him in a cell far away from him. Robb walked quickly to the door of the cell and saw Eddard standing in the cell. As Varys said, he was unharmed. With his blood-stained face, he smiled at Eddard, who was suspected to be a spy, and said, "Eddard, that's great, you're okay too. I'll let you out right away." After that, he opened the cell and let Eddard out. "Robb, are you the eldest son of Lord Eddard Stark?" As Eddard walked out of the cell, a man with golden red hair and a tough look stood up in the room next to him and asked Robb. Robb turned his head and observed that the man in noble casual clothes had the family emblem of forked lightning and four-pointed star on his body. Robb, who had long been familiar with the famous families of the Seven Kingdoms, knew the identity of this man in his heart. He nodded and said, "I'm Robb Stark. You should be the Earl of Black Harbor, Lord Beric Dondarrion. Why are you imprisoned?" "Yes, I'm Beric. Lord Eddard came to me with his majesty's will 2 days ago and wanted me to assist. I trusted Lord Eddard's honor, so I followed him to read his majesty's will." Then Beric nodded and admitted his identity and then explained to Robb the reason why he was imprisoned. "Thank you for your trust in my father. Eddard, release Lord Beric and then release all the prisoners here. Let's get out of the Red Keep together." Robb nodded to Beric and thanked him, then turned around and handed the cell key to Eddard and gave him an order. Eddard nodded, took the key immediately, and opened the cell door. Chapter 77. Full Fire. Whoosh. Bloodwind whistled as it galloped on the Bluestone Avenue. Most civilians avoided it in time, but some unlucky civilians were knocked out by it. When it ran through a staircase alley with a charred wall and came to the White Shoemaker Square, it suddenly slowed down and stopped moving forward. Bloodwind saw that this wide and empty square had 3 exits, but it stretched its head and sniffed with its nose, smelling a familiar pungent smell. It sensed the direction in its heart, and the passage with a pungent smell was where Robb was. Jaime, who was hiding in the passage on the right side of the square, frowned at the entrance of the Shoemaker Square, the huge direwolf wearing blood-red armor. He didn't see Robb Stark behind him, so Jaime gave an order to the messenger beside him. "Blow the horn, let all the soldiers go out, and force this beast to go to that passage. Woo. Trample, trample, trample." Hearing the horn order, the 40 soldiers in ambush on both sides of the Shoemaker Square heard the order, stepped on the untidy steps, and kept the army formation to move out of the passage. In the Shoemaker Square, the 80 soldiers, except for the 30 gold cloaks brought by Jaime, the remaining 50 were soldiers who had previously searched for Robb Stark. They gradually gathered together after hearing the noise. Most of them were gold cloaks, and a few were Lannister soldiers. Therefore, the two ambushing army formations lacked coordination during the movement, and the formation was a bit scattered. However, this time they were not marching to fight, so when they walked out of the passages on the left and right sides, they immediately rearranged the army formation. Looking at the humans appearing on both sides, and smelling the smell, the clever Bloodwind immediately smelled the smell of the trap. Pretending to be completely unaware, Bloodwind exerted force on his limbs and quickly approached the Bluestone passage with a pungent smell opposite the Shoemaker Square. Humph, no matter how big it is still a beast without wisdom. Looking at the armored giant wolf running straight into the trap, Jaime, who was standing at the entrance of the right passage, thought to himself. When the time was right, he gave a loud order, ignite. Next to Jaime, an archer who had been well prepared shot the ignited arrow directly into the sky. The flaming arrow drew a parabola in the air and fell in front of the Bluestone passage. Wow. The green liquid that had been poured on the floor of the passage was instantly ignited, and a faint green flame immediately rose in the passage. The Shoemaker Square had just been burned by a fire 2 days ago, and now it was hit by another green fire. When the arrow shot into the sky, the bloody wind that had been observing the left and right sides immediately changed direction and headed towards the right army formation that shot the arrow. Oh no, this beast is targeting us. Everyone, prepare to fight. Looking at the armored giant wolf that suddenly changed direction, Jaime's face changed drastically, and he immediately drew the long sword at his waist and shouted loudly. Jaime, who had been a royal guard of the Mad King, thought of the extremely lethal wildfire when he considered that this ice wolf might not be able to fight. So, he led his men to the Alchemist Guild, took some wildfire, and planned to set up a wildfire trap to burn the beast to death in one fell swoop. But who knew that the giant wolf without Robb Stark's command was so smart and was not fooled at all. Although there were various ceiling stalls in the Shoemaker Square that hindered Bloodwind's charge, it was slow and could not be lifted at all. However, the slow speed was also relative to the speed of running on the King's Road. In the blink of an eye, Bloodwind was about to contact Jaime's army. Facing Bloodwind's charge, Jaime stood at the forefront of the army with his sword in his hand. He planned in his mind that he would deal with it by cutting the horse's legs when facing a cavalry charge. But when Bloodwind, wearing armor stained with blood, charged, his eyes met its cunning eyes, and Jaime suddenly felt an extremely dangerous feeling in his heart. He instantly gave up his original plan and rolled to the side to avoid it in advance. Facts have proved that his intuition is correct. When approaching the army formation, Bloodwind's speed suddenly increased by 1/3, and with a faster charge speed, it directly crashed into the army formation of soldiers who had no time to react. The worst soldiers in the front row were knocked away on the spot. Compared with the golden robes in front of the Gate of the Gods, they were luckier. Bloodwind did not fully accelerate, so he flew relatively low. The soldiers in the army formation that were impacted were hit one after another like dominoes, and the army formation was suddenly overturned and in chaos. This time, Bloodwind, who did not fully accelerate, rushed to the second half of the army formation, and was like falling into a quagmire, surrounded by soldiers on both sides of the army formation. However, this may be bad news for them. Why did Bloodwind suddenly accelerate just now? This is because, since its attributes exceeded 10 points, Robb deliberately let Bloodwind keep a low profile and suppress its combat effectiveness, which is another hidden killer. Even in the Dreadfort War, even if Bloodwind was hit by 3 arrows, Robb did not let it exert all its physical abilities. Previously, when he was at Gendra's Forge, Robb comforted Bloodwind from a distance and passed on the message, telling him that he didn't need to suppress his physical ability after getting out of the carriage this time, and he could go all out. In the previous battle between the inn and the Gate of the Gods, Bloodwind easily solved it without having to use all his physical ability. But now these hateful humans designed a trap, trying to burn it to death with the terrifying flames they had seen before. Bloodwind, with a raging rage in his heart, would not be polite to them, and went straight up, and went all out. Bloodwind in the crowd quickly raised his claws and slapped a soldier in front of him. The sharp claws of the claws left 4 deep lacerations on the soldier's chest. While it was slapping the man, the wolf mouth full of hideous serrations was not idle either. It stretched its head forward and bit a soldier's head and then threw it suddenly. Under the powerful bite force of Bloodwind, the soldier's head was instantly separated from his body and the headless corpse violently sprayed blood, which was no different from beheading. Some soldiers tried to attack Bloodwind's unprotected limbs, but with its wolf head and limbs that were longer than its sword, the soldiers surrounding Bloodwind could not get close to it. After Jaime rolled over and stood firm, he glanced at the surrounded Bloodwind, and then took a few steps forward, ready to raise his sword, to attack the lower part of Bloodwind's tail, where the wolf armor could not defend. But before he squeezed into the encirclement, a Lannister soldier with the same idea had already taken action. The Lannister soldier who was behind Bloodwind just raised his sword to approach. Bloodwind, sensing something, tilted his head and glanced back, and saw someone approaching from behind. Its right hind leg was lifted up like lightning, stepped on the chest of the Lannister soldier wearing mail, and then kicked up. The sharp nails of the right hind leg slashed along his chest and directly tore the chin of the Lannister soldier off, and blood and flesh splattered everywhere. Ah. The Lannister soldier who was kicked out of the encirclement by the bloody wind, fell to the side of Jaime. The soldier on the ground screamed heartbreakingly, and raised his right hand slightly to seek his help. Seeing the soldier's entire jaw disappear, and the horrible appearance of his tongue and teeth could be seen directly, Jaime shook his head, and stabbed his heart with a sword, to save him from the pain. In this era, ordinary people who suffered such injuries had no possibility of treatment. The bloody wind with full firepower is simply the most terrible human killer. Its wolf kiss full of serrated teeth and its claws with huge power on its limbs basically hurt and killed anyone who touched it. Even the soldiers who were lucky enough not to die were basically seriously injured and had no strength to fight again. Thanks to the book Friends 20180104161357901, Thinkio Night Mooring, engineering technician, and family cultivation Midish for voting for the monthly ticket. At the same time, thanks to all the big guys who voted for the recommendation and followed the reading every day. Thank you for your support. P.S. Bloodwind's hidden body combat power was decided in chapter 15, not a last minute idea. You can check it out. There are still a few chapters before the King's Landing plot ends. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 78 Wildfire Bottle. Seeing that nearly half of his soldiers were killed or injured in a short period of time, Jaime, who had been observing Bloodwind, knew that he could not wait any longer. He saw the opportunity when Bloodwind opened his mouth to bite off a soldier's head and cut into it from the right side of its body with his sword. Bloodwind's front and back range was tightly guarded by its sharp claws and limbs that were longer than the sword. On the contrary, it could only rely on its wolf mouth to attack from the side. Clang. Jaime, who cut into the right side of Bloodwind's body, chopped the rivet joint of the metal armor with a sword. However, the craftsmanship of the blacksmith in Winterfell was quite good. Under Jaime's fierce slash, only a deep mark was left, and the rivets connecting the armor did not fall off. Bloodwind felt that the right side of his body was attacked, and he shook off the soldier's head in his mouth, and immediately turned his head to bite Jaime. Jaime's footsteps were very flexible, and he moved closely to the right side of Bloodwind's body, close to the hind legs. Bloodwind's neck was not long enough to bite Jaime, and his slender limbs could not attack him, because of the angle. This was the blind spot of Bloodwind's attack, that Jaime had found at the cost of half of his soldiers' lives. When he cut in just now, the sword that chopped him down made him realize that his idea of cutting off Bloodwind's metal armor and letting all the soldiers attack him directly had failed. Seeing Bloodwind's huge wolf head retracted to the front, Jaime leaned slightly to the right, raised the long sword in his hand high, and prepared to chop back at the right hind leg that Bloodwind's armor could not protect. Suddenly, he felt a shadow appear above his head and saw Bloodwind's huge body leaning to the right, like a metal mountain, pressing down on him directly. Bang! Bloodwind's body of more than 900 kilograms, carrying huge kinetic energy, hit the ground with a loud noise. It was not attacked and fell to the ground, but actively rolled against Jaime. Bloodwind could feel something was pressed under its body. It rolled on the ground and turned into a lying position, and then its strong limbs exerted force and stood up again. I saw 2 soldiers who couldn't dodge on the ground, bleeding from all 7 holes, and their chests were obviously fractured and shriveled. Before Bloodwind fell to the right, James reacted quickly and rushed to the left, jumped under Bloodwind's crotch, and escaped. Bloodwind stood up and continued to kill the soldiers. Seeing fewer and fewer soldiers, James made up his mind and quickly ran to the side of the exit passage and opened a wooden box next to the passage. The box contained rows of fist-sized glass bottles filled with green liquid. These were also wildfires taken from the Alchemist Guild, but they were different from the barrels of wildfires used to set traps. They were smaller and easier to carry or throw. Picking up a glass bottle, there was a piece of cloth on the mouth of the glass bottle. This was temporarily added by James to the alchemist, specifically for igniting fire and throwing. Just now, there were many soldiers on his side, and now they were basically slaughtered by the giant wolf, so James didn't have much to worry about. He picked up the flint on the side, lit the cloth, took 2 steps forward, and threw the glass bottle at Bloodwind. Bloodwind was smart. He had been paying attention to James' every move, since he was blinded by James. Seeing him throw out an unknown object, Bloodwind immediately stopped the ongoing massacre and rushed forward. Bang! The glass bottle shattered instantly when it hit the ground, and the green liquid splashed everywhere, and the flaming cloth directly ignited them. A small stream of green flames rose up and raged where Bloodwind had just stood. A golden-robed man who was caught by Bloodwind and fell to the ground, covered in blood, was stained with green flames. This bone-eroding wildfire used the chainmail and flesh of the golden robe as firewood and burned fiercely. In just over 10 seconds, the golden-robed man stopped making any sound and fell there quietly, waiting for the wildfire to burn him to ashes. Bloodwind was naturally not fond of fire, and was even more afraid of this terrifying green fire that he had seen before. It looked back at the terrifying green fire behind it, and scratched the ground with its right claw in a somewhat anxious manner. Bang! A bottle of wildfire was thrown out by James in his right hand, and Bloodwind dodged it quickly. Looking at the human who made him feel extremely annoyed, constantly throwing green fire, Bloodwind turned his head to look at the passage that was no longer guarded, gave up slaughtering the few humans, and turned around and ran into the passage. This seemingly long battle was over, and the soldiers in the passage across the square hurried over. Oh, kill him, let us out. The midday sun shone through the narrow and high windows, illuminating the first floor of the Red Castle dungeon. In the crowded prison, all kinds of criminals were shouting loudly. Eddard and Beric held standard longswords and chopped down the last jailer who had no time to escape. After this period of killing, Robb's blood contract points increased a lot, exceeding 50 blood contract points, and gradually getting closer and closer to the critical point of losing control. So, with Eddard and Beric taking action, he took Sansa and several noble prisoners on the second floor and stood behind. Looking at the overcrowded cells on the first floor of the dungeon, Robb nodded secretly. As he expected, some criminals would be caught in the process of searching for him. And at this moment, these criminals in the prison, who were used without any regrets, would be the best cover for them to escape from the Red Keep. The jailer who ran out just now should go to ask for help. Eddard, release all the prisoners on this floor, and be quick. Robb, who had been observing Eddard's every move, saw that the 2 of them had cleared the jailers and immediately shouted to Eddard. Yes, Lord Robb. Eddard turned his bloody face and nodded to Robb and immediately searched for the key from the pile of corpses to release the prisoners. A few minutes later, nearly 100 criminals in the White Dungeon were released. When there are many released criminals, there will inevitably be brainless idiots. 3 middle-aged men with dirty and wretched looks, who had been imprisoned for who knows how long, were released from prison. They set their sights on the only and quite beautiful woman here, Sansa. Although the young man next to her held a very intimidating 2-handed heavy sword in his hand, they were already lustful and their lower bodies were swollen. The 3 of them picked up a jailer's sword on the ground and came to Robb. The middle-aged man in the lead stretched out his dirty tongue, licked his lips, and said to Robb, "Hush. What a beautiful woman, boy. Hand her over if you want to live." Swish. The ice passed through the knees of the middle-aged man like lightning, The middle-aged man didn't react and felt that he suddenly became shorter. Ah, my legs. When the severe pain came, the middle-aged man with both legs broken at the knees fell to the ground, touching his knees that were spurting blood, and screamed loudly. After using the ice to speak for himself, Robb said to the two frightened criminals on his left and right, since he can't control his lower body, there is no need to take it anymore. You two start chopping from his knees. If he doesn't chop his third leg before he dies, you two will end up like this. Ah. What are you two going to do? Ah. The screams here have already attracted the attention of all the criminals. Seeing Robb so strong and brutal, all the criminals whispered, I won't say much nonsense. There should be a lot of gold cloaks gathered outside the cell now. If you want to leave the Red Castle alive, find a weapon and follow me. As soon as he finished speaking, Robb pulled Sansa, who had covered her face with one hand and had not dared to speak, and walked towards the door of the cell. The criminals in the passage all made way for them, and Eddard and Beric followed behind Robb silently. Creak. The dungeon door opened, and when Robb led his men out, they saw dozens of gold cloaks holding spears and swords waiting for them. The escaped jailers were also beside them. Charge. Without saying anything more, Robb raised the ice and shouted, and the two teams shouted and charged towards each other, fighting together. Chapter 79 Little One. Silent Sister Street starts from Visenya Hill and goes straight to the Great Sept of Bela. Now the whole street is crowded with pedestrians, men, women, old and young, all walking towards the Great Sept of Bela. The wolf howling that panicked everyone just now seemed to have no effect at this time. These civilians who went to the Great Sept of Bela either wanted to see the excitement or to see if they could get some small favors from the nobles. There were almost no people who really mourned for King Robert. Aria's flexible and thin body squeezed in the crowd and ran quickly towards the Great Sept of Bela. She wanted to turn from the crossroads in front of the Great Sept to the direction of the Gate of the Gods, where the wolf howling came from. She only remembered this road that Eddard took them to King's Landing. She didn't know the alleys and paths at all, and she would definitely get lost. Ah. Run. Son, come here. Aria squeezed for a long time with great difficulty. Just as she was about to reach the crossroads, suddenly, the crowd in front of her became agitated. Everyone turned around, shouted with fear on their faces, and hurriedly ran for their lives. Aria, who was walking against the flow in the crowd, was bumped and squeezed from side to side, like a small boat in the huge waves. Fortunately, she had been practicing water dance, and she moved flexibly to avoid the head-on collision. She hid behind a large stone pier beside the street. After the crowd had basically escaped, Aria climbed up the stone and stuck her head out to check the situation at the intersection. Bang! A golden robe with a lot of blood flew in front of Aria. Only a small amount of flesh and blood was left on the neck of the golden robe connected to the head. Judging from his wound, the missing half of the neck was bitten off alive. Bloodwind. Aria looked past the golden robe and saw Bloodwind fighting with a large number of golden robes. At the intersection in front of Bela Cathedral, nearly 50 golden robes were holding spears and swords, fighting face to face with Bloodwind, who was bypassing from Steel Street. These 50 golden robes were the guards of the south gate of the Red Castle who were transferred by Clay to the Gate of the Gods. They happened to have an encounter with Bloodwind here. However, the result of the battle was obvious. Without the restriction of wildfire, it would be difficult for ordinary humans to survive the bloody wind. In the Great Sept of Bela, noisy shouting and screaming were heard outside. Joffrey, Cersei and others walked out of the Great Sept with the King's Guard and the gold cloaks. Standing on the top steps of the tall Great Sept, they saw the monster Bloodwolf that was slaughtering their soldiers at a glance. Jaime. Didn't Uncle Jaime bring people to help? How did this monster appear here? Doesn't this mean that Uncle Jaime, seeing his soldiers being slaughtered by the giant wolf? Joffrey, who always liked bloody scenes, spoke with a pale face at this moment. Impossible. Jaime must have missed this dire wolf. Otherwise, he would definitely be able to kill it. Hearing her son's words, Cersei, with a cold white face, answered in a decisive tone. Joffrey didn't listen to Cersei's words at all. He was worried that Robb Stark's giant wolf would come to him. After killing all the gold cloaks below, he immediately ordered Barristan beside him. Sir Barristan, you take everyone down and make sure to kill this monster. "Yes, your majesty." Barristan nodded and agreed, then called the other 5 Kingsguards and the remaining 70 gold cloaks after Jaime had selected 3 teams to walk down the stairs. Arya, who was climbing on the stone pier, saw the movement on the stairs of the Great September. She didn't understand Bloodwind's fighting ability at all, and she immediately became worried. After all, there were more than 100 gold cloaks in total, plus the very powerful captain of the Kingsguard, Barristan, whom my father had mentioned in casual conversation. Arya, who could not bear it any longer, stood up from the stone pier, jumped hard to attract Bloodwind's attention, crossed her arms, and waved her hands and shouted loudly, "Bloodwind, run. There are too many of them." Various shouts and screams were heard at the battle scene, and Arya's voice was directly drowned out. Generally speaking, when immersed in a battle, one will be in a state of full concentration. But as a slaughterer who is at ease, Bloodwind's ears trembled slightly, and he tore the body of a gold cloak with one claw, and then turned his head to look in the direction of Arya. Little cub. When he saw Arya, Bloodwind directly sent this thought to Robb in his heart. At this time, in the Red Castle, Robb directly felt the strong thought transmitted by Bloodwind in his heart, just after he cut off the right arm of a gold cloak with cold. As Bloodwind got closer and closer, the close connection between the two of them became clearer and clearer. Hearing the words little cub, Robb reacted instantly that Bloodwind had met Arya. Since Bloodwind appeared majestically in front of Arya during the crusade against the wildlings, she often brought Nymeria to Robb to ask how to make Nymeria look like Bloodwind. By the way, she wanted to stroke Bloodwind whenever she had nothing to do, and even more so, she wanted to ride it. Bloodwind, who was annoyed, often conveyed the thought of little cub, "Can you eat it?" to Robb. Of course, Robb's strong emotional order clearly prohibited Bloodwind's idea. Originally, Robb planned to use the smell of Arya's old clothes stored in the caravan carriage after meeting up with Bloodwind to let it search for Arya in King's Landing. After all, a wolf's nose is more sensitive than a dog's nose, and it is a piece of cake for Bloodwind to find Arya by smell. "Bring her here. Don't eat her." Robb dodged a gold-robed man's self-sacrificing thrust and used the ice in his hand to cut off his foot. At the same time, he distracted himself and conveyed his thoughts to Bloodwind. At the crossroads in front of the Great Sept of Bela, Bloodwind received Robb's thoughts and instantly opened fire with full power, showing great power and rushing towards Arya. "Go. There's something wrong with that wolf." Its unusual state attracted the attention of Barristan on the stairs. He shouted loudly behind him and quickened his pace. Bang! Bloodwind knocked away the last gold-robed man in Arya's direction, and it ran to Arya in a few steps. Turning around and half squatting, Bloodwind's back was just high enough for Arya, who was standing on the stone pier, to climb up. Without any hesitation, Arya climbed directly onto the wolf's back covered with sticky blood. Because the blood on the wolf armor was too sticky and slippery, Arya had no foothold at all when she climbed up, and could fall down at any time. Arya, who was groping around, suddenly found a flat groove the size of a wash basin in front of the wolf armor. Her eyes lit up, and she immediately kicked her feet, jumped forward and sat in the groove. This was the riding seat that Robb had specially set up for Bloodwind's metal wolf armor. There was also a place to kick her feet below, but unfortunately Arya's legs were too short to reach it. When Arya was fully prepared and Bloodwind stood up, Barristan had already rushed towards Bloodwind with the Kingsguard and the gold cloaks. Boom. Bloodwind remembered Robb's thoughts closely. After receiving Arya's message, he had no intention of continuing to fight. He jumped onto the stone pier and used his limbs to jump to the roof of a bungalow next to it. The roof could not withstand the force and was instantly pressed by Bloodwind's weight, with many cracks appearing, as if it was about to collapse. However, before that, Bloodwind had already used this place to gain leverage and jumped directly to the street leading to the Red Castle. Barristan looked at Bloodwind running towards the Red Keep, not knowing whether to guard Joffrey or continue chasing Bloodwind. Da-da-da. Hearing the sound of horses behind him, he turned around and saw Jaime riding a horse towards them with a man holding a wooden box. Thanks to the will of the Fire King for the reward, Nangang Yai, Xiang Kuao. Book friends 160,825,220,919,574 were Ewing and the untaught people for the monthly votes. At the same time, thanks to all the big guys who voted for recommendations and followed the reading every day. Thank you for your support. Chapter 80, Reunion. Bloodwind led Arya all the way to the Red Castle. They encountered some scattered gold robes along the way, but they didn't dare to stop him when they saw Bloodwind covered in blood. Soon, they came to the front gate of the Red Castle. The high and thick main gate of the Red Castle was tightly closed at this moment. The gold robes guarding upstairs also saw Bloodwind and suddenly became agitated. Bloodwind looked at the height of the main gate of the Red Castle and the wall. Even without this heavy wolf armor, it was not possible for it to jump up. Woo. Just when Bloodwind and Arya didn't know how to enter the Red Castle, a loud horn sounded from the right side of the Red Castle. When Robb communicated with Bloodwind in the blacksmith shop, he told it to follow the horn sound if there was no order from him. Without hesitation, Bloodwind immediately carried Arya and rushed to the right side of the gate, where the horn sounded. Standing on the wall of the south gate, Clay blew the horn in his hand and saw Lord Robb's giant wolf running towards this side. He immediately shouted to the family guards below, "It's coming, open the door quickly." The gates of the south and north gates of the Red Castle are made of oak wrapped in iron sheets. The small double opening gates are less than 3 meters high and can be opened by one person. This height is enough for Bloodwind to pass through. Bloodwind climbed the wall from the stone stairs near the south gate and quickly passed through the open gate. Lord Robb's direwolf is simply a giant dragon running on the ground. Clay and the guards saw Bloodwind's power up close and couldn't help but admire it. Then they continued to perform their duties and guarded this gate tightly. Bloodwind continued to move forward along the wall of the south gate and came to the second checkpoint of the Red Castle, the inner wall. The low inner wall was not guarded at the moment, probably because it was involved in the battle against the criminals led by Robb. Bloodwind accelerated to the low inner wall, jumped up, stepped on the inner wall, and then jumped into the inner city of the Red Keep. At this moment, Robb was fighting in the open space between the inner gate of the Red Keep and the entrance to the dungeon. A small number of timid or ulterior motives criminals huddled at the back of the team. Seeing that the battle here was deadlocked, they whispered to each other for a while and secretly ran towards the throne room and Migos holdfast. At the main entrance of the throne room, these criminals rushed over with excitement, holding various weapons they had picked up. This door was a door of wealth for them, with endless wealth and beautiful women at their fingertips. The two criminals who rushed in the front had just reached the door of the throne room when a cold light flashed, and the two turned into half humans as tall as Tyrion, but they were the kind who were dead. Boom, boom. A huge and burly figure limped out of the dark gate. This was the Mountain, who was arranged by Cersei to recuperate in Migos holdfast and protect Myrcella and Tommen. He heard the sound of fighting in the Red Keep, so he came to help with a thick wooden stick in his left hand and a two-handed giant sword in his right hand. Although his left foot was injured, which would affect his combat effectiveness, that was for top combat forces like Robb and Jaime. He basically killed these criminal minions one by one, which was very easy. Moreover, 2 rows of golden robes ran out from his left and right sides and fought with this group of criminals. It was called a battle in the throne room, but it was better to say it was a one-sided massacre. These criminals who did not dare to participate in the frontal battle had no resistance to these golden robes. However, their screams successfully attracted Robb's attention. Oh no, the Mountain is still in the Red Keep. If the battle is not resolved as soon as possible, they will be attacked from both sides. Just when Robb's pressure was doubled, a familiar huge figure appeared in his field of vision. Bang, bang, boom. Bloodwind, who came to help, appeared at the back of the Gold Cloaks formation. After a burst of full power left and right collisions, in less than half a minute, the Gold Cloaks who had been fighting Robb for a long time were directly dispersed by Bloodwind. The dispersed Gold Cloaks saw Bloodwind slaughtering his companions like a monster, and they were frightened and fled in all directions. The criminals who had been suppressed by them for a long time and felt aggrieved in their hearts roared and began to chase and kill. Bloodwind, where is Arya? Robb looked at Bloodwind who came in front of him and stretched out his tongue excitedly, wanting to lick him, and asked. Bloodwind turned his head when he heard the question. Robb followed his sight and saw Eri hiding in the corner of the inner wall and waving at him. It turned out that the smart Bloodwind was worried that the little cub on his back would be injured in the subsequent battle, so he put Eri in the corner of the inner wall before joining the battle. Thanks to Robb touched Bloodwind's big head and was about to speak when it suddenly bit the ice in Robb's hand and pulled him to the side. Bang! A loud bowstring sound came from above the inner city wall gate. Ding! A huge crossbow arrow as thick as a spear went straight through the position where Bloodwind and Robb were just standing, piercing a criminal who was shouting excitedly through the chest and nailing him firmly to the ground. Robb, who was pulled down by Bloodwind, quickly got up from the ground and looked at the huge crossbow on the inner city wall gate that was restringing the arrow. He immediately called Eddard and said to him quickly, "You and Lord Beric will quietly take Sansa to meet Eri and then walk along the inner wall to the south gate. Someone will help you evacuate." After Eddard nodded in agreement, Robb turned to Bloodwind and said, "Bloodwind, let's go destroy that giant crossbow." Upon hearing this, Bloodwind immediately stretched his legs forward, stuck his buttocks, and pressed his upper body against the ground to make it easier for Robb to climb onto his bloody back. Stepping on the specially designed footrests of the wolf armor, Robb turned over and sat on the groove of the wolf armor that was covered with blood, sticky and slippery. Abahoo. After Robb sat firmly, he gently patted the armor on Bloodwind's neck. It let out an excited short howl and went directly to the low inner wall gate. Eddard saw Robb riding Bloodwind and heading straight for the inner wall. He immediately turned around to find Beric and Sansa, who, riding on Bloodwind's back and feeling its running speed. Robb's depression today dissipated a lot. "Bloodwind, try not to kill people." Seeing that he was approaching the gate of the inner city wall, Robb ordered Bloodwind. In the previous battle, Robb specifically chopped off hands and feet and let other criminals finish the job to avoid absorbing the red mist. But Bloodwind killed people indiscriminately when he entered the field, and a lot of red mist was absorbed by him again. Now he felt that his desire for killing in his heart was a little out of control. Quick, that monster is coming. Is it ready?" On the gate of the inner city wall of the Red Castle, the captain of the guard was urging several golden robes to reload the only giant crossbow on the city wall. In fact, the craftsmen of King's Landing are very powerful. The city defense system they have established is extremely comprehensive. Not only are there heavy catapults, trebuchets, giant crossbows, but even flamethrowers are designed and equipped. However, these large-scale city defense equipment are all set on the walls of the 7 gates of King's Landing. There are also many giant crossbows and other defensive equipment on the outer wall of the Red Castle, but because the inner wall is low and narrow, it can only be equipped with one giant crossbow. Moreover, these large equipment are used to deal with wars and need to be operated by specially trained personnel. They are not used at ordinary times. This is why Bloodwind rushed through the Gate of the Gods without being attacked by them. Just now, the captain of the guard saw that his people were fighting with the criminals and did not have the upper hand, so he did not order the giant crossbow to be activated. But who knew that a monster like armored giant wolf came and collapsed his formation in a few strokes. This scared him so much that he quickly ordered several of his golden robes to operate the giant crossbow to attack. Click, click, click. The thick bowstring of the giant crossbow on the wall slowly twisted, and it was still reloading arrows. On the other side, Bloodwind had already quickly rushed up the wall from the stone stairs next to the inner wall. As soon as he stepped onto the wall, he met several golden robes guarding there. However, compared to the gold cloaks before, they were quite lucky. Bloodwind followed Robb's instructions and did not use its powerful wolf mouth and claws. It either directly knocked them away with its armor or swept them down with its iron whip-like tail. Chapter 81 Coins. A golden robe screamed and was knocked into the inner city. Fortunately, thanks to the low height of the inner city wall, although he was hit hard, at least he saved his life. Robb rode on Bloodwind's back and kicked a golden robe on the head of the helmet, causing him to faint on the spot. Because Robb didn't want to absorb too much red mist, all the timid Bloodwind was tightly blocked by the golden robes on the wall in the middle of the wall. Bloodwind, kill it directly. Seeing that several golden robes had reloaded arrows on the giant crossbow and were adjusting the direction of attack in front of him, Robb shouted at Bloodwind. Hearing Robb's voice, Bloodwind no longer showed mercy. Its wolf head rushed forward and bit the right waist of a golden robe. Then it bit hard with its sharp teeth in its mouth, and then tilted its head and threw it out. The golden robe, with half of its body missing, flew out with blood. It leaped forward again, raised its right claw, and stepped hard on a golden robe on the ground, digging its sharp nails into his body, crushing him to death with its own weight. Bloodwind, showing its ferocity, killed 2 people in an instant. The golden robes on the gate of the inner city wall were shocked by the cruel death of their teammates, and took a step back, fearing that they would be the next victims. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Bloodwind directly knocked away the 2 golden robes in front of him, escaped from the encirclement, and rushed towards the giant crossbow at an accelerated speed. Shoot, shoot. The captain of the guard looked at the giant wolf that was already in front of him, and shouted desperately for his men who were still adjusting the direction to shoot. Bang! Bloodwind hit the wooden giant crossbow that had not yet adjusted its direction. Robb jumped off it in advance, and with a move of ice in his hand, he split the captain of the guard in half from head to hip. If you don't want to become like him, open the city gate immediately. Looking at Bloodwind, who was shaking his head a little dizzy, and came out of the wreckage of the giant crossbow that had turned into a pile of scrap wood, Robb raised the ice in his hand, and said to the gold robes, "Squeak." The gate of the inner city wall was opened, and dozens of criminals ran towards the open city gate in panic. Behind them, the mountain limped and drove them slowly with 2 teams of gold robes. Eddard and his party took advantage of the criminals to attract attention and quietly passed under the parade ground, where the tournament was often held, heading for the south gate. Above this road is a royal garden, where Joffrey will hold his wedding in the future. When he was poisoned to death, the jester Dontas Harlot, with Sansa, also fled all the way down from here. Because Bloodwind was too conspicuous, Robb did not choose to meet up with Eddard and evacuate together. Instead, he rode on Bloodwind's back, stood on the gate of the inner city wall, and commanded these dozens of criminals to rush towards the outer wall of the Red Castle. Sure enough, because Robb was here, the guards in the mountain and the Red Keep were attracted by their group of people, and came to surround them. Bang, bang, bang. The criminals who thought they were about to escape had just run to the foot of the outer wall of the Red Keep when 3 crossbow bowstring sounds were heard. 3 arrows as thick as spears directly nailed the 4 criminals who were rushing in the front to the ground. One of the arrows pierced the criminals like a candied horse. Seeing that the criminals could no longer rush through, and the 3 crossbows on the outer wall were still a great threat to Bloodwind, his original intention was just to attract attention and delay time, so he immediately drove Bloodwind to the right side of the inner wall. His move confused the criminals. They thought that Robb would release them, and with such a mighty giant wolf in front, he would definitely lead them out of the Red Keep. Who knew that Robb would actually drop his pole at the critical moment and ride the giant wolf to turn around and run away? Squeak. The gate of the inner city wall was closed by the mountain and his men. Seeing the gold cloaks gradually surrounding them, the criminals could not help but greet Robb politely in their hearts. When Robb rode Bloodwind to the wall leading to the south gate, Eddard and others did not continue to evacuate, but waited for him here. Robb frowned and was about to speak when he saw Sansa coming up with tears on her face, crying and saying to him, "Whoa, brother, Arya is gone. Missing?" Robb immediately conveyed his thoughts to Bloodwind in his heart, asking it to look for Arya. Bloodwind raised his head, his huge nose twitching, breathing the air. It stands to reason that the stench on Arya would be very obvious, but it could not smell any stench around. Little cub smell. No. Bloodwind, who searched fruitlessly, conveyed his thoughts to Robb. Are there any traces where Arya disappeared? There is a strange coin. Hearing Robb's question, Sansa answered while taking out an old coin. Robb jumped off Bloodwind and picked up the coin in Sansa's hand. He saw at a glance that the front of the coin was engraved with a faceless head. Faceless. Jaqen. He instinctively kidnapped Arya, but left the coin behind. He wanted me to go to the House of Black and White in Bravos in person. The answer to Arya's disappearance suddenly appeared in his mind, and Robb tightly grasped the coin in his hand. No wonder Bloodwind couldn't smell Arya. For the faceless who are good at hiding, it would be abnormal if they couldn't remove the smell. Arya will be fine. Let's leave King's Landing first. Knowing that Arya would be fine for the time being, Robb decided to flee King's Landing first. After hearing what he said, Sansa unconditionally trusted Robb, and they headed towards the south gate. With the conspicuous Bloodwind following, the mountain and the gold cloaks on the outer wall certainly saw Robb and others. However, because the mountain was suppressing the criminals, and the gold cloaks on the outer wall were far away, they could not come to intercept them for a while. After meeting up with Clay and the other two at the south gate, the group of people from Winterfell headed straight for the south tower according to the evacuation plan. When they arrived at the south tower, in addition to the 2-7 family guards, Torrhen was also waiting for them. When Eddard saw his brother, he wanted to hug him immediately, but Robb, who had received the Bloody Wind's message, stopped him with his hand. Torrhen, why are you here? Robb asked, looking at Torrhen, whose face was covered in blood and seemed to have been through a brutal fight. Lord Robb, after your direwolf killed all the Lannister soldiers in the inn, the three of us followed it all the way here. However, we encountered some gold cloaks, and I was the only one who survived. Torrhen saluted Robb and immediately answered, "Oh, do you know him?" After hearing Torrhen's answer, Robb turned around and asked the 2-7 family guards. "No, Lord Robb." The two family guards looked at each other and shook their heads. "Then why did you let him go up to the tower?" "Because he told us loudly that he was the logistics commander of Winterfell, Torrhen Stark. He also took out the commander's seal of Winterfell." Hearing Robb continue to teach, the two family guards answered in detail. "Torrhen, how do you know there are people?" "Because I once killed them." Hearing Robb's question, Torrhen was about to answer. At this moment, under the south wall, Jaime led dozens of gold cloaks and ran straight to the south tower from a distance. "Lord Robb, you go quickly, I will stop them." Looking at the gold cloaks under the wall, Torrhen's face changed drastically, pointing to the passage in front of the tower and spoke. "Ha ha ha, you sacrificed yourself to stop the enemy for us. Torrhen, you are so loyal. Don't worry, with Bloodwind by my side, I'm not afraid of this golden robe. However, I'm very scared of the wildfire hidden in the passage ahead." Thanks to Xlaw for the 500 point reward, the Song of the Times, and the point reward from Brother Leo Jiu. Thanks to Wang Xiaohui, Jan Moao, Maple Bridge Night Mooring, Dead Corpse Wandering Soul, Book Friend 20211017081140431, No Way Is No Way, Winsco Stark, Drunken Dance and Singing in the World of Dust, Zero Hamster Jun 0. And Stars in the Sky for their monthly votes. At the same time, thanks to all the big guys who vote for recommendations and follow the reading every day, thank you for your support. PS. Well, the chapters about the two brothers Torrhen and Ed were deleted. Then, in order to thank everyone for their support, there will be 3 updates tomorrow night to end the plot of King's Landing. Chapter 82 Evacuation. Wildfire? Lord Robb, what are you talking about? Hearing Robb's words, Torrhen's eyes twitched slightly, and a puzzled expression appeared on his face, and he asked. He shouldn't have come up empty-handed just now, right? Robb ignored Torrhen, but turned his head to ask the two family guards. Yes, he was holding a wooden box, and said it was yours, so we didn't dare to ask more. You two idiots, why didn't you say anything just now? Hearing the answer of the two family guards, Clay couldn't help but frown and scold. Lord Clay, Lord Robb didn't ask us just now. Robb shook his head. The idea conveyed to him by Bloodwind had been confirmed. Combined with some of his previous judgments, he said to Torrhen, Torrhen, you are the secret agent of Lannister. Secret agent? How is it possible? I don't understand what you are saying more and more. Lord Robb. Hearing this, Torrhen's pupils suddenly dilated, and he answered loudly, while reaching his right hand to his waist. Crack. When Torrhen took out the thing from his waist and was about to throw it out, Bloodwind, who had been alert for a long time, rushed to his side and bit off his right hand in one bite. Snap. Ah. With Torrhen's scream, a piece of flint fell to the ground from the bloody right hand that Bloodwind had bitten in his mouth. Torrhen, why? Why did you betray us? Eddard, who had been silent all this time, looked at his brother, thought of the brothers who died in King's Landing, and asked loudly, "Ha ha ha, why?" Torhan, who was holding his broken arm and had a distorted face in pain, heard his brother's question and answered loudly with wild laughter, "Because it's unfair. Herion was born earlier than us, and the inheritance right of Kaha City is his by nature. I won't say anything about this, there is no way to change it. But why did we receive the same training and join Robb Stark's wolf pack when we arrived at Winterfell? Why is it that you are more trusted by him than me, and he treats you better? When he talks to me normally, he is polite, but he treats you and Little John as casually as friends. Is this differential treatment fair? From beginning to end, you never accepted me at all." Sure enough, the facts later proved that this was the case. "You are all commanders of elite troops, and I'm the only one in charge of the logistics troops. How much reward did you get for winning the Dreadfort, and how much reward did I get for transporting infantry and cleaning the battlefield?" At this moment, Torhan's loud accusations were heard on the South City building, telling about his unfair treatment. He let out a long sigh and continued, "At that time, I even had nightmares about these unfair treatments. Haha, that dream was so clear and real. Brother, I couldn't eat or sleep well at that time. Did any of you care about me? You only knew how to look at the sleeping Robb Stark, but I'm your brother." Fortunately, there was Lord Jaime. During the time in Winterfell, he always taught me swordsmanship and often invited me to the tavern to drink and play with women. When I decided to work for Lord Jaime, that was the last time I had a nightmare. A strange crow taught me how to take revenge on you. Maybe that was the resentment in my heart transformed into it. Any last words, Torhan? Robb secretly paid attention to what Torhan said in his heart, but this was not the time to think about it. He slightly raised the ice in his hand and said, "Lord Robb, can you let me come?" After listening to his brother's accusation, Eddard, with a sad face, looked at Robb and said in a pleading tone. Robb nodded to him, then turned to the people behind him and said, "You go first, Clay, lead the way, follow the evacuation route." "Yes, Lord Robb." Clay agreed and walked forward along the wall with Sansa. "Torhan, it's not that we didn't accept you. It's that you never integrated into us. Do you know? Lord Robb originally wanted you and Little John to command the cavalry together, and I would manage the logistics. It was I who privately asked Lord Robb to switch, and he put you in the logistics. Why did I do this? Because the casualty rate of the logistics troops is much lower than that of the cavalry in the front. So, these should not be the reason for your betrayal. I'm sorry, it was my brother who made a mistake. Don't worry, my brother will ask Lord Robb to go back and tell my father that you died in battle." Ed looked at his brother with a sad face and spoke in a gentle tone. After that, he raised his long sword and walked forward, gave his brother a final hug, and at the same time, pierced Torhan's heart with the long sword in his hand. After hearing his brother's words, Torhan stood there stupidly without any resistance. With his heart pierced, he fell softly on his brother's shoulder, whispering a few words to Eddard, while blood gushed out of his mouth. Robb had been focusing on the King's Landing team until Varys told him that only Eddard survived the breakout team. This made him feel that this hidden spy was suddenly too obvious, and almost all the conditions pointed directly to Eddard. But Eddard was really a spy, and he could have attacked him long before the breakout. So, Robb assumed that no one in King's Landing was a spy, so who else knew the address of their shop in Shoemaker Square? At that time, he recalled that on the afternoon of arriving in King's Landing, Eddard had left the city to contact Torhan and others. Woo. While Robb was thinking, Bloodwind brought the box of wildfire hidden by Torhan according to his thoughts. When he opened the box, it was full of wildfire in glass bottles. Looking at Jaime and others who had already stopped and did not move forward, he gave up the idea of using them, let Bloodwind hold the wildfire box, and took Eddard to the evacuation site. Seeing that the wildfire did not explode on the wall of the South Tower, Jaime knew that Torhan's plan had failed. Before, in the Shoemaker's Square, while his companions were not paying attention, Torhan dealt with the two Winterfell cavalrymen, and then he and Jaime rode on horseback with wooden boxes to chase Bloodwind, and took the initiative to set up an ambush with wildfire. Jaime, who had experienced the fighting power of Bloodwind, did not think that they could keep Robb. Therefore, he did not bring the gold cloaks to continue approaching the South Tower and make useless sacrifices. Robb and others evacuated the road, which was the route that Sansa took to escape from Winterfell in the original play. This was the route that Clay found with his own people after more than a month of exploration, based on the general information provided by Robb. After going down the south wall, because Bloodwind was too large to walk through the alleys, Robb and Eddard had to take a detour. When they arrived at this small branch of the Blackwater River, Sansa and others were already sitting on 3 rowing boats. Use the tools prepared by Clay in advance to knock out the rivets on Bloodwind wolf armor, so that this blood-stained and scratched first-generation wolf armor will be scrapped directly. After everything was ready, Robb and others all boarded the boat and rowed towards the capstan tower of Blackwater Bay. Bloodwind, hanging the wildfire box, raised his head and jumped into the river, swimming comfortably in the water. Although most of the blood was on the wolf armor, there was still a lot of blood stuck to its hair, just right for cleaning. Several rowing boats came to the location of the capstan tower of the Blackwater River, and Gendry was waiting for Robb with a hammer. After he got on the boat, Beric proposed to say goodbye to Robb and others here. Robb nodded and blessed, and then did not say anything else. After all, he was the Earl of Black Harbor City, and it was impossible for him to follow him back to Winterfell. The capstan tower of the Blackwater River was the place where Bronn shot arrows to ignite wildfires and blow up Stannis' fleet during the Battle of Blackwater in the original play. At this moment, a beautiful 3-masted ship was quietly waiting for them. James brought several men in golden robes to the first floor of the dungeon. The cell was in a mess. After being released, the imprisoned criminals destroyed the cells that held them. They walked down to the second floor, which was better. After all, it held noble prisoners, so they still had some dignity. On the third floor, James smelled a strong smell of blood in the corridor. He did not look closely, but walked quickly to the cell where Ed was imprisoned. Seeing the door of the cell wide open, James shook his head and was about to go back when the sound of chains moving was heard in the cell. He entered the cell with a surprised look on his face and saw Ed, expressionless, adjusting his sitting position in the corner of the cell. Lord Eddard, didn't your son come to save you? He came. Why didn't you flee with him? Haha, how can I explain clearly to a man who betrayed his oath and stabbed his monarch from behind? Listening to Eddard's sarcastic words, Jaime replied angrily, if I hadn't stabbed you with that sword, now in King's Landing. Forget it, you won't believe it anyway. Eddard glanced at Jaime, who was hesitant to speak. He was silent and didn't say much. Seeing that he didn't want to talk to him anymore, Jaime said sincerely, Lord Eddard, although it is impossible for us to sit together and drink in a friendly manner, but it is my honor to meet a knight like you. After saying this, Jaime was about to turn around and walk out of the cell. At this moment, Eddard said, tell Cersei that I'm willing to plead guilty. Chapter 83 Beta Square. Crash, crash. This beautiful 3-masted merchant ship that Clay hired for a large sum of money was named the Wind Witch and came from Bravos. Standing on the deck of the 3-masted merchant ship, Robb looked at the King's Landing, which was getting farther and farther away in his field of vision, and felt very emotional. In the few days since he came to King's Landing, he had experienced many things such as betrayal, sacrifice, and killing, which were things he had never thought of in his previous life. Only with experience can there be growth. He has many new understandings on how to correctly view the world and integrate into the world. Brother, can we still see our father? Just now, why didn't you take him away by force? And what about the missing Arya? Sansa approached from behind Robb, thinking of her father and sister in King's Landing. She couldn't help but ask softly, Sansa, what nonsense are you talking about? Of course I can see my father again. He got what he wanted and kept the honor of himself and the Stark family. At that time, I also thought about taking him away by force, but in this way, not only would he not be happy, but he would live in endless regret and guilt in the future. Robb turned his head to look at Sansa beside him, stretched out his hand to hug her thin shoulders, and continued, Arya will be fine for the time being. When I'm free, I will go to Borovas in person to pick her up. Our family will definitely be reunited. I promise. Yeah. Sansa, who had been worried these days, leaned her head on her brother's shoulder and felt extremely safe and secure. The follow-up cleaning work of the Red Castle was not completed until late at night. Jaime came to Cersei's bedroom, and Joffrey happened to be there. After he relayed Eddard's words, Cersei had a thoughtful expression on her face, while Joffrey was excited. Because Robb Stark and his giant wolf came and went freely in King's Landing, and the Red Keep today, the royal family lost face. Joffrey, who was eager to be recognized by everyone, immediately said to Jaime, Tomorrow, let Eddard Stark confess his treason, and acknowledge that I'm his father's legal heir in front of everyone in the square of the statue of Baelor in the Great Sept of Baelor. But I think something is wrong. Eddard Stark can escape. I can understand that he is loyal to his honor and refuses to run away. However, he is willing to admit treason, which is absolutely not in line with his character. Hearing Joffrey's order, Jaime shook his head and said to Cersei, who was in deep thought. Cersei picked up a glass of wine on the table, took a sip with her red lips, and said in a calm tone, Jaime, do you think Eddard Stark is a man who would play tricks? Oh, if he was so stubborn, we would be locked up in the dark cell now. So, he said he was willing to plead guilty, so he will definitely do what he says, right? Well, I think he will. Hearing the answer from her dear brother, Cersei smiled and said, well, you can reply to him. As long as he can do what he says, we allow him to put on black clothes and return to the north full of ice and snow wastelands. But, I still feel something is wrong. Jaime, his son has messed up King's Landing, and the Red Castle. If he doesn't make some compensation, then, as soon as Joffrey succeeds to the throne, he will definitely attack their Stark family. By then, there may be no Stark family from then on. His son did something wrong, and he, as a father, is here to pay it back. Cersei said with certainty. Well, if that's the case, it does make sense. Compared to honor, one's family and clan are indeed more important. I'll go see him now, and by the way, ask Captain Barristan to prepare for the security of tomorrow's trip. Jaime heard her analysis, nodded and answered, then turned and walked out of the room. Mother, when Eddard Stark recognizes me as the legitimate heir tomorrow, can I be crowned and become king? After Jaime closed the door, Joffrey asked Cersei with joy on his face. Cersei looked at her son's handsome face and smiled softly. Yes, no one in the Seven Kingdoms will question Eddard Stark's honor. Wait for you to be crowned king. From now on, no one can bully us anymore. The next morning, a large number of golden cloaks sent by Cersei announced loudly at the 7 city gates and all the busy streets. The former hand of the king, Eddard Stark, will confess his treason at the statue square of the Great Sept of Baelor at noon. This news instantly ignited the emotions of the civilians in King's Landing. Under Cersei's deliberate propaganda, all the civilians knew that the armored giant wolf belonged to Robb Stark. The casualties and losses caused by it were all counted on the Stark family. If Robb and the others were still in King's Landing, these civilians would only be in awe and absolutely dare not speak out. But they have already left, and Eddard Stark, who will plead guilty today, instantly became their outlet for venting. One by one, they called their friends, and went to the Great Sept of Baelor together, wanting to occupy a position early, so that they could watch this good show up close. The Night's Watchman Euron had just sent away the few criminals in the Red Keep dungeon, and completed the transfer procedures himself, when he heard the news. He had a reverent heart for Duke Eddard, who tried his best to help him. Hearing the news that he was about to plead guilty, he couldn't help but frowned and followed the crowd to the Great Sept of Baelor. In an alley in Flea Bottom, a burly middle-aged man grabbed the hands of a dirty little beggar and had an intense conversation. Didn't you say that anyone can be killed as long as they have money? I want to kill Cersei and Joffrey. The little beggar excitedly said to the burly man loudly. Someone can't afford the price. Therefore, the thousand-faced god will not accept someone's sacrifice. Hearing this, the burly man smiled and replied in a soft tone. Jaqen, what do you want to do by kidnapping me? If you want money, send me back to the north, and my brother will give you a lot of gold dragons. Seeing the burly man's lukewarm look, the little beggar's excitement slowly calmed down, and asked in a puzzled tone. Follow someone back to the House of Black and White, and the girl's brother will naturally come to you. Jaqen still smiled and replied to Arya in a soft tone. Arya, who was waiting for Robb at the inner wall at the time, suddenly blacked out. When she woke up again, the burly man who called himself Jaqen was in front of her, but the other party neither hurt her nor let her leave. Arya, who had just heard the news about her father, was excited and was about to run away when this scene happened. I want to see my father. Okay, the girl must obey someone's instructions, otherwise she will fall asleep again. I know. After Arya and Jaqen agreed, they walked towards the Great Sept of Bela together. At noon, in the Great Sept of Bela, Bela Statue Square is a square covered with white marble. In the center of the square stands a huge statue of Bela I. It stands calmly on the pedestal with a compassionate expression on its face. Cersei and Joffrey stood on the top of the square's pulpit, with Barristan behind them, and Jaime protecting them. On the level below the pulpit, Varys, Baelish, Pycelle, the High Septon, Sandor and others stood on the left and right. On the lowest square, the King's Guard and the Gold Cloaks held weapons, stood alert with their chests and heads held high. The wide statue square was now crowded with civilians who came to watch. Shuso. There was a sound of chains, and Ed, who was escorted by 2 men in golden robes, was taken out from the exit of the sanctuary. Ed, who had been in the dark prison for a long time, looked at the sun shining on the earth, closed his eyes, and enjoyed the sunshine. Looking at his face full of nostalgia, it seemed that he wanted to engrave this feeling of embracing the light in his heart. Chapter 84, Rebellion of 100 Kings. Traitor. Traitor, coward, murderer, wolf-like beast. Seeing Eddard appear, all kinds of insults and abuses rang out in the Bela Statue Square, like a wave hitting Eddard. Joffrey, who was on the pulpit, saw the excited scene and smiled. He was very satisfied and shouted to the 2 gold cloaks who were escorting Eddard, "Bring him here." The gold cloaks escorted Eddard to the pulpit. Along the way, there were insults from the common people of King's Landing. One of the common people even spat a mouthful of thick phlegm on Eddard. Eddard endured these insults silently, and stepped onto the pulpit with determination in his eyes. Jaime and Ser Barristan behind Joffrey looked at Eddard who was insulted, and their faces showed some pity. Perhaps they also have the spirit of chivalry, and they feel that a knight with noble character and honor should not be insulted like this. In stark contrast to them, Joffrey, who was almost laughing with joy on his face, pointed to the reserved position on the lower level of the pulpit, and said with a smile, "Hey, take him to that position, Archbishop, you can start." "As you command." The Archbishop, dressed in gorgeous clothes, answered Joffrey, and then raised his hands, and pressed down to the civilians in the square, saying loudly, "Quiet. Today under the gaze of the 7 gods, we stand in front of the blessed Great Sept of Bela, and witness together, the former hand of the king, the Warden of the North, the Duke of Winterfell, Eddard Stark, confess his crimes." As soon as the Archbishop spoke, the Bela Statue Square quickly became quiet. As he spoke, everyone's eyes were focused on Eddard. Eddard turned around, and started from Joffrey, who was smiling, and looked around the podium. A self-deprecating smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. He said loudly, "At this moment, I don't have so many titles. I'm just Eddard Stark of the Stark family. I admit my crimes in front of the new and old gods." After saying this, Eddard paused slightly and continued, "I admit that my greatest crime is my rigid and stubborn adherence to honor, and my foolish and crazy kindness. It is because of these crimes I have committed that I'm standing here to be punished." Hearing Eddard's words, Joffrey's smile froze on his face. He was about to speak, but was stopped by Cersei beside him, because Eddard had continued to speak. "My dear friend, my king, ruler of the 7 kingdoms, protector of the realm, the legitimate heir of Robert Baratheon." Having said this, he first glanced at Joffrey, who was full of expectation, and Cersei, who had a smile on her face, and then turned to the civilians in the sculpture square, and roared with anger that had been hidden in his heart for a long time. "It can't be this, the illegitimate son of Cersei Lannister and Jaime Lannister, Joffrey Heshan, my dear friend Robert Baratheon, has no legitimate heirs. Moreover, he was murdered by the Lannister family." "Shut up. Stop him. Don't let him continue talking. Impossible. He is lying. He is a liar." Hearing Eddard's rapid roar, Cersei's face turned pale, and she called on the gold cloak to stop him from continuing to speak. Hearing this, Joffrey pointed at Eddard with anger on his face, and explained to the stunned civilians in the square. At the beginning, the reason why the civilians in the square were so excited and hated Eddard so much was not only because of Robb and Bloodwind. Another reason was that Eddard Stark, as a representative of the Seven Kingdoms who was upright, just, and honorable, actually admitted to treason. It was like a public figure known for his positive image, whose personality collapsed, and fans loved him deeply, and hated him deeply. But now, not only did he not admit treason as the Gold Cloaks had advertised, but he broke out such an astonishing scandal, which made all the civilians subconsciously want to believe it. Cersei looked at the square, and the pairs of contemptuous eyes like swords swept towards her and Jaime. She immediately screamed angrily, "Are you two dead? Seal his mouth." The two Gold Cloaks who were responsible for guarding Eddard reacted, and immediately stepped forward, to stop him from talking. Eddard, whose hands were tied, suddenly exerted force, and used his shoulders, to knock the two Gold Cloaks away. Sandor, who was standing behind Eddard, leaned forward and wanted to step forward to stop him, but he seemed to remember something, and finally stood there silently. "What I said above is all true, and I hereby ask for the witness of the new and old gods in heaven. You liar, tell me the truth again. Otherwise, I will kill all of you Starks, and put your heads on the tip of the gun, to show everyone the fate of liars and traitors." Seeing Eddard knocking away two guards, Joffrey came down from the top of the pulpit angrily, rushed to Eddard, pointed at Eddard's nose with anger on his face, and shouted loudly with almost broken voice. Looking at this angry and irritable boy, thinking of yesterday, when he talked about his son who refused to kneel, and had light in his eyes, Eddard roared with a firm look in his eyes, "I swear in the name of Eddard Stark, the Hand of the King, and Robert Baratheon, the King of the Seven Kingdoms, the whole of Westeros, regardless of the size of the family, regardless of the noble or poor birth, whoever can wipe out the Lannister family and avenge King Robert Baratheon, will be the only legitimate heir to the Iron Throne." Liar. You shameless liar. Hearing that Eddard was still talking nonsense, Joffrey, who was furious, turned around and drew his long sword from the waist of his deposit robe, and stabbed Eddard with one sword. "No. Stop it. No." Eddard, who was relieved, after saying what he wanted to say, looked at Joffrey who was stabbing him with a sword, and a calm smile appeared on his lips. Puff. Joffrey, who had learned swordsmanship, and had a foundation in swordsmanship, accurately pierced Eddard's heart with one sword. Feeling a pain in his heart, in Eddard's last vision, the whole world seemed to slow down. Cersei, whose face was as pale as paper, was raising her hand to stop Joffrey. Jaime, who was anxious, jumped down from the pulpit, and also stopped Joffrey. Varys, who looked dazed, Basel the High Septon, who looked stunned, and Baelish, who was hiding in the shadows in the corner with a smile on his face. All these scenes quickly faded away in front of Eddard, and darkness gradually came. At the last moment, an idea emerged in his mind. Bastard Robert. Anyway, you don't care about that iron chair, so just consider it as a reward for helping you get revenge. Wow. When Joffrey killed Eddard with a sword, the civilians who had been shocked and speechless suddenly burst into a huge discussion, and the sacred Bela statue square suddenly became like a noisy vegetable market. Some of these people believed, some doubted, and some were half believing and half doubting. Everyone was expressing their own opinions. Chop up his body and feed it to the dogs. After killing Eddard, Joffrey's anger had not yet dissipated. He turned around and ordered the golden cloak. "As you command." Joffrey threw away the stained longsword in his hand, turned around, looked at his mother and the ministers around him, and his face was gloomy. Then he realized that he seemed to be in trouble. He immediately said to Sandor who was standing beside him, "Dog, take me back to the Red Castle." "Yes." Cersei looked at the back of her son Joffrey leaving, not knowing what to say. Jaime under the pulpit looked back and stared, and their eyes intertwined. When Robb learned that his father was killed by Joffrey, it was already a month later, when the Wind Witch arrived at White Harbor, and was personally received by Earl Wyman. After Earl Wyman solemnly relayed his father's words before his death, Robb lost control of his emotions on the spot, roared to the sky, and vented his negative emotions. Until this time, he knew that Eddard had changed, and did not insist that Stannis was the legitimate heir to the Iron Throne as in the original play. He realized that Eddard had already let go of the honor he had adhered to all his life. The reason why he refused to leave King's Landing was to make way for him and pave a road that would not kneel to anyone. In his grief, Robb also deeply understood that his father Eddard's oath of revenge at the cost of the Iron Throne would likely turn the War of the Five Kings in the original play into an unprecedented rebellion of 100 kings. Thank you for the reward of the coins from the Big Lee as a witch, and thank you for the monthly votes from Hanji Xiu, Yan Huliu Xiang Hang Cheng V, Buhuz Hiu Pifai, and Eddard's called aircraft carrier. At the same time, thank you for all the big people who voted for recommendations and followed the reading every day. Thank you for your support. P.S. There are 3 updates today with nearly 8,000 words. Thank you for your support. I will open a single chapter to chat later. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 85, King's Landing has ended. Come in and chat. First, let's talk about it. When the plot of King's Landing begins, readers say that Robb took the risk alone and entered King's Landing. After Robb's soul merged, he obtained this body and inherited the bond of the Stark family. Even if Eddard was half his father, he could go to pick him up if it was not dangerous. Yes, his original plan was to arrive at King's Landing before Eddard got into trouble and pick him up. He remembered that in the original play, there was at least a month between Eddard's resignation as the King's Hand, because he did not want to assassinate Dragon Mother, and Robert's death and Littlefinger's betrayal. Therefore, he immediately set out from Winterfell and rushed to King's Landing for nearly half a month. There should have been no risk. However, due to the butterfly effect, Robert died early, Eddard was imprisoned early, and was secretly influenced by the Three-Eyed Raven, which led to the betrayal of Torhan, which made the trip to King's Landing extremely dangerous, but it was not yet to the point where Robb used Bloodwind. Second, let's talk about what the readers said. It did not change the plot at all, and Robb's entry into the city was useless. Let's count the people and things Robb changed on this trip. Changed Gendra's plot so that he doesn't have to worry about being cursed by the Red Woman with the King's blood in the short term, and indirectly changed the fate of the Night's Watcher Euron. Retrieved the Stark sword Ice, killed the executioner Eileen, the commander-in-chief of the Gold Cloaks, and muddied the waters of King's Landing, so that they sent a large number of people to search the city. Changed Sansa's fate, and no longer let her be humiliated and tortured. After these things, she will grow up and help Robb in the future. Changed James' fate, and he didn't escape back to the Westerly without attacking Eddard. Now he helps Cersei and Joffrey manage King's Landing, so there will be no plot of being arrested in the Battle of the Whispering Wood. Influenced the original characters such as the Mountain, Sandor, and Beric. Most importantly, if Robb hadn't rescued Eddard personally and expressed his will to his father, Eddard would never have changed and made the final vow of revenge. In fact, Westeros is very particular about reputation. In the original drama, even if Robb had not died, he would not have been able to obtain the Iron Throne under the banner of revenge for Eddard. Why was Robert the leader of the War of the Usurper, and then he became king? In addition to the fact that Eddard, who was upright and selfless, had no interest in power, and took the initiative to let him, there was another important reason, because Robert's grandmother was Lele Targaryen, the daughter of Aegon V, because he has a trace of Targaryen blood. Therefore, if there is no orthodox name, even if Robb defeated all the enemies in the south, the people did not recognize you, and there would always be people who privately discussed your rule. Just like Robert, 10 years later, it was still felt that some people in the Seven Kingdoms were looking forward to the return of Targaryen. Then, after the King's Landing plot, Robb's reputation for loyalty, filial piety, courage, and strategy would also be widely spread. This is an intangible asset. It is also like Eddard's reputation for integrity and honor. The promises he made would definitely be believed by other families. Third, about the subsequent plot. After King's Landing, in addition to some of the original plots, many will be original deductions. By the way, according to the feedback from readers, the plot of King's Landing ended early. In fact, there should be more. Through clues, we can infer that Torhan is a spy, and then the plot of the brothers confronting each other was directly deleted, so the ending is a bit hasty. Then it is the plot of the rebellion of 100 kings in Westeros. Well, the rebellion of 100 kings is an exaggeration. There won't really be 100 kings. Compared with the original drama, this time the North will go south again under the leadership of Robb, after being fully prepared. It is no longer aimed at rescuing Eddard, but a bigger new goal. The situation of the Lannister family is more difficult than the original drama, so the family will be more united and more proactive in seeking allies under the control of Tywin. Other noble families, big and small, as long as they are ambitious, will begin to develop their own forces and start a chaotic war of big fish eating small fish. Fourth, let's chat at the end. First of all, thank all the readers who rewarded, voted, and commented. Really, seeing your support, it is really a motivation to write, and I can be happy all day. Of course, there are a few negative comments, and some are particularly uncultured, and directly scold me, calling me NT and writing stupid. Haha, these comments really affected my mood for the past 2 days. When I was typing, I was thinking, if I wrote like this, would I be scolded? I was timid when I wrote. In general, the positive comments far outweigh the negative comments. If nothing goes wrong, this book should be on the shelves in more than a week. I will do more typing during this period and try to make a breakthrough then. Martin's Game of Thrones is really not easy to write. All the rest time in the past month was just typing, not watching TV series or playing games. Every time I deleted and revised a lot, I basically sat in front of the computer after work every day and updated until 12:05 in the morning, checked for typos, washed up and went to bed, which was basically 1 o'clock at that time. Then I got up at 7 o'clock the next morning, made breakfast, and went to work. Well, it feels like I have talked about almost one chapter, so let's leave it at that. Sincerely thank every reader for their support. Without you, this book will exist. Chapter 86 Brewing. King's Landing, Bela Statue Square. Civilians gradually began to leave the square, leaving behind a lot of garbage and taking away today's shocking news. On the podium, the bigwigs had all left, and 2 gold-robed men were carrying Eddard's body one after the other. In the crowd, Arya, whose mouth was tightly covered by Jaqen, kept struggling. Jaqen, who was really impatient, pressed Arya's neck lightly, and she fainted instantly. Then, Jaqen held Arya like a father, leaned her head on his shoulder, and walked out of the square with the crowd. Yoren looked at the 2 gold-robed men carrying the body away, and with his right hand, he grasped the handle of the long sword at his waist and followed them. The 2 gold-robed men carrying the body walked on the main street for a while, and then went into an alley. There was a slaughterhouse at the innermost of this alley. Looking at the 2 gold-robed men entering the alley, Yoren drew his long sword from his waist and wanted to walk forward quickly. Snap! A wrinkled, old hand rested on Yoren's left shoulder. Brother of the Night's Watch, let me do it. Yoren was startled by the sudden hand on his shoulder. He turned around and recognized that it was the captain of the King's Guard, Barristan the Fearless. They had met at the Red Keep when Yoren went to the Tower of Prime Minister to meet Eddard. But, Sir Barristan, you are a King's Guard after all. You can't disobey the King's order. Haha, not anymore. Last night, Cersei and Joffrey called me over privately and said that they would give me a fiefdom by the sea and let me resign as the captain of the King's Guard. Besides, that cruel and violent Joffrey Heeshan is not a real king at all. Barristan shook his head when he heard his words and said a lot of things to Yoren, as if he was venting his dissatisfaction. So you believe what Lord Eddard said? Of course, Lord Eddard's honor is something that no one in the 7 kingdoms can question. Barristan nodded and answered. Then he flashed past Yoren and said without looking back, I'll go get his body back, and then please send it back to Winterfell. A man like him shouldn't be treated like this after death. Under Yoren's gaze, Barristan quickly approached the 2 gold-cloaked men carrying the body. After a conversation, Barristan, who was obviously frustrated, knocked the 2 gold-cloaked men to the ground in a blink of an eye with a speed that was completely inconsistent with his age of more than 60. Seeing Barristan waving at him, Yoren hurried forward and helped carry Eddard's body. While the 2 of them were busy carrying Eddard's body, they did not notice that a hooded man was silently watching them where they had just stood. After a little observation, the hooded man turned around and left here. He suddenly stopped when he reached the end of the alley. A tall and fat monk in a loose red robe, with a bold front part, was leaning against the dirty wall of the alley, drinking wine from his own wine flask. What? You knocked me off my horse during the tournament. You're sure you can capture me and claim the reward now? Thoros from the Lord Barrick, I'm not here to capture you. I have received a revelation from my lord, the Lord of Light, to preach to you. After all, the night is dark and full of dangers. Thoros, the red-robed monk, took a big sip of wine, his face flushed, and answered the hooded man with a drunken look. Beric lowered his hood, walked forward, and said to Thoros with a smile, haha, the red god of Essos? Sorry, I believe in the 7 gods. Looking at Beric walking past him, Thoros took another big sip of wine, opened his mouth full of alcohol, and laughed loudly, haha, faith can be changed, my lord is willing to accept any believer who sincerely believes in him. Beric kept walking forward, without looking back, and answered firmly, change faith. Then wait until I die. Hearing Beric's rather firm words, Thoros smiled and shook his head, and followed him with shaky steps. Yoren and the others rented a carriage on the main street. With Barristan's status as a king's good who had not yet resigned, the two of them easily left the Gate of the Gods. A few kilometers outside the city, they caught up with the temporary team that was escorting the criminals of the Red Keep to the Great Wall of the North. Hello, Sir Barristan, where are you going next? After putting Eddard's body into a transport carriage, Yoren let out a long breath and asked Barristan. Hearing Yoren's question, Barristan turned his head to the east and said softly, where to? Maybe. I will find the real king and die for her. Okay, I hope to see you again in the future. Goodbye. After saying goodbye to Barristan, Yoren led the reserve Night's Watch team and headed towards the north without stopping. This time, without Gendra's influence, there was no scene in the original play where the Lannister knight, Amory Lorch, came to chase with the gold cloaks. The 2 gold cloaks who lost Eddard's body returned to the Red Castle and wanted to report the matter to Joffrey, but they were intercepted by Jaime. Although Eddard tricked him before he died, Jaime still respected him in his heart. He quietly instructed the 2 gold cloaks to use the bodies of criminals piled up in the Red Castle to feed the dogs, and then report to Joffrey. The 2 gold cloaks knew Joffrey's cruel character. Since Lord Jaime had spoken, they were happy to avoid punishment, and the matter was quietly erased. When Yoren successfully took Eddard's body north, Robb was still unaware of it on the narrow sea, sailing on the Wind Witch. Westerly, Casterly Rock. Tywin and Kevan sat opposite each other in a study, looking at the raven letters in their hands, with very serious expressions. What are Jaime and Cersei doing in King's Landing? How could Joffrey kill Eddard Stark? Kevan's face was quite bad, and he spoke first. Let's not discuss what has happened. Our focus now should be on the north and the Riverlands. Tywin shook his head with a stern face, and did not answer Kevan's complaint, but threw out the main topic that should be discussed. When something like this happens, the Tullys and the Starks have always been one. When they are ready, they will definitely send troops at the same time to attack us. Kevan nodded, followed his brother's topic, and continued. We can't wait for them to attack. Kevan, you will lead 15,000 soldiers to the Golden Tooth tomorrow. Defend the Golden Tooth, and wait for my orders. We can attack the Riverlands at any time from here, and prevent them from raiding the Westerly. If we have to fight, we must fight on their territory. Tywin hesitated for a moment, and then gave Kevan the order. Yes. What about King's Landing? Kevan agreed and raised another question. Write a letter to Cersei and Jaime, asking them to manage King's Landing well, treat the nobles who are willing to surrender well, and protect the Iron Throne for me, at least in the short term. Let Clegane return to the Westerly as soon as possible. He will be needed in the war. Tywin first answered Kevan's question, and then continued with a serious expression. Kevan, this time our Lannister family will either establish a 1,000-year dynasty, or the entire family will be wiped out, just like the Targaryens before. You must be careful when marching and fighting. I will, but, will the rumors about Cersei and Jaime make us lose the support of the people? Kevan nodded first, and then carefully talked about the more sensitive topic. Hearing this, Tywin shook his head without hesitation and denied it. Eddard Stark is slandering Cersei and Jaime. It is normal for a dying person to tell lies. But with Eddard Stark's reputation, many people will believe it, even if it is a lie. Yes, this is what I'm more worried about. Those ambitious noble families may follow this lie and covet the Iron Throne. However, Westeros still puts force above all else. As long as the wolf cub and the old trout dare to start a war, we will put their heads on the tip of the gun and let other noble families see. Didn't Robert sit on the Iron Throne in this way? Eddard's speech in King's Landing before his death, as time went by, spread to the nobles of all sizes in Westeros. Westeros entered a brief period of calm, but anyone with a slightly sensitive sense of smell could sense that a storm that was about to sweep across the entire continent was brewing. Chapter 87 Return of the King. A month later, in the banquet hall of the new castle of the Manderley family in White Harbor in the north, Robb and Lord Wyman sat in the main seats on the high platform, and Sansa and the wife of the Lord's eldest son, Wallace Manderley, Lee Wolf, Lee's eldest daughter, Wilfred Manderley, and the youngest daughter Willa Manderley, sat on the side. In the seats below the banquet hall were the officials of White Harbor, as well as Eddard, Clay, Gendry and others. Bloodwind was curling up his huge body, lying quietly in the corner of the banquet hall. Lord Robb, my eldest son, Wallace Manderley, has led 3,000 soldiers from White Harbor to respond to your call to Winterfell. I should have gone to Winterfell in person, but Lady Catelyn wrote a special letter to let me stay in White Harbor. Now it seems that it is your arrangement. Seeing Robb, who was sad after knowing the news about Lord Eddard, Lord Wyman tried to divert his attention. Well, it was arranged in advance. I secretly left Winterfell and went to King's Landing more than a month ago. Unfortunately, father. Robb just nodded and answered. Then he thought of his father again. He forced himself to suppress the sadness in his heart. He picked up the wine glass on the long table and continued. Thank you for your loyalty to the Stark family. In the future, the Manderley family and the Stark family will jointly reach the pinnacle of Westeros. Cheers. Cheers. Upon hearing this, Lord Wyman hurriedly picked up the wine glass and toasted with Robb. After taking a sip of the fine wine in the glass, Lord Wyman, as a shrewd manager of the trading port, said to Robb in a worried tone, Lord Robb, as far as I know, there is now an army of about 30,000 people gathered in Winterfell. Although the noble vassals all bring their own military rations, I'm afraid that Winterfell cannot afford it in the long run. By the way, our Manderley family is willing to provide you with 100,000 bushels of wheat, 50,000 bushels of barley and rye, and 2,000 fat sheep as military rations. Lord Wyman, thank you for your generosity. I know you are worried. At present, Winterfell can temporarily supply it, and it is also supported by the foundation of the Bolton family. As for the future, compared to the barren north, the rich south will give us the most powerful support. In fact, I quite like the family motto of Theon and his family, force is better than hard work. Hearing Lord Wyman's gift, Robb forced a smile on his face and nodded in reply. Then when are you going to lead the army south? After hearing his answer, Lord Wyman did not continue the previous topic, but raised a new question. No hurry, some things have not been dealt with. I heard someone say that the external injuries only look serious, and the real life is the hidden injuries in the body. By the way, Lord Wyman, does White Harbor have its own fleet to protect it? No, our garrison in White Harbor only needs to maintain port security. The large merchant caravans that come here to trade sometimes even work as pirates. They don't need our protection at all. Hearing Robb's question, Lord Wyman shook his head and answered. Robb nodded thoughtfully after hearing this, and said, well, I understand. Let's enjoy lunch first. We will return to Winterfell in the afternoon. Lord Robb, are you in such a hurry? I haven't treated you well yet. The adults in Winterfell have been waiting for too long. I have to go back quickly. Please send a raven to Winterfell for me. By the way, I have to borrow the blacksmith shop in White Harbor. My blacksmith wants to help me rebuild a saddle. 2 days later, Catelyn, who received the raven from White Harbor, estimated the time and sent out cavalry early to explore the situation outside Winterfell. It was not until the afternoon that the cavalry saw Robb's returning team, and he immediately returned to Winterfell to report. At the entrance of the Winterfell parade ground, Catelyn led all the northern nobles, except Earl Wyman, to wait for Robb's return. The situation was completely different from the last time. This time, all the vassal earls granted by the Stark family were on the list. Tap tap tap. Outside the parade ground, the sound of horse hooves approached. The first person to catch everyone's eyes was Robb, who was sitting on a huge direwolf with an extremely cold expression. After him, it was Eddard, Clay and others. Sansa was sitting in a carriage. Lord Robb. Seeing Robb riding a wolf approaching, all the earls, guards, and soldiers in the parade ground bowed their heads sincerely and saluted, shouting in unison. In the past month, after Sam's newly established Northern Intelligence Agency, some exaggerated propaganda has been spread. Robb led a dozen Winterfell cavalrymen to break into King's Landing to rescue his father Eddard and his two sisters, defeated the Kingslayer, the Mountain, assassinated many high-ranking officials in King's Landing, and turned King's Landing upside down. The news has spread throughout the North. Everyone admired Robb's loyalty and filial piety in rescuing Duke Eddard at all costs, and his amazing military force in King's Landing against thousands of enemies. Compared to the northern nobles' understanding of Robb as the young Wolf Lord a month ago, now they have secretly called him the Blood Wolf Lord. Moreover, they all agreed that the Blood Wolf Lord's rescue operation in King's Landing had not failed. Lord Eddard had been successfully rescued by the Blood Wolf Lord, but he, who was upright and fair, chose to die to expose the true identity of Joffrey Hill and let everyone know the real cause of King Robert's death. Jumping off the special saddle on Bloodwind, Robb looked at his mother, pursed his lips, and was about to speak. Catelyn immediately came up to him, gave him a big hug, and whispered in his ear, "Robb, you must first put these earls first and let them feel that you value them. Your father's matter, let's talk about it in private." Hearing his mother's words, that she suppressed her grief, and considered him first, Robb was moved and nodded vigorously. Catelyn saw that her son understood her intention. She loosened her hands, glanced at her obviously haggard son, and walked towards Sansa who had just got off the carriage. Robb calmed down a bit, and walked forward a few steps. He looked around the earls in different costumes, but most of them were about the same age as his father. He looked calm, and said loudly with full of aura, "My lords. First of all, thank you for responding to my call. King Robert Baratheon was murdered by the Lannisters, and my father Eddard Stark died for his loyalty. The purpose of our gathering here is no longer to rescue the Duke of Winterfell. Instead, it is to overthrow the false king sitting on the Iron Throne, Joffrey Hill. Overthrow the false king." As soon as Robb loudly changed the purpose of this call, Earl Rickard was the first to respond loudly. He seemed to suddenly think of something, and directly drew the long sword from his waist, and placed it in front of his chest, with the tip of the sword facing Robb, and knelt on one knee, shouting, "There is no king in the Seven Kingdoms who can make us loyal to the North. On behalf of the Stark family, I will always be loyal to the Blood Wolf Robb Stark, the new king of the North." Clang, clang, clang. Robb Stark, long live the king in the North. Long live the king in the North. Seeing Lord Rickard's statement, the Lord Earls, who had already been convinced by Robb, who had captured the Dreadfort and overthrown King's Landing, all drew their swords, knelt on one knee, and shouted in unison. The guards and soldiers around were infected and shouted loudly. This shout spread like a ripple to the entire Winterfell. Thanks to Yin Hunayu for the 5200 points reward, number 2 mansion, and the Will of the Cinder King for the points reward. Thanks to Yin Hunayu, Wang Xiaohui downstairs, Lishan, number 2 mansion, Wang Jiang Hanayu, Winsco Stark, Shuiao 201708211610218220, Arbitration Authority, July S, Chenra 94, Liu Deo Iuxun, Miheoshu. Sonjen Kamomo, like Early Bird, Moya Shangju and others for their monthly votes. At the same time, thanks to all the big guys who voted for recommendations and followed the book every day, thank you for your support. PS, I'm speeding up the coding and strive to add more chapters after the release. Chapter 88 Strategy. Listening to the cheers like a tsunami in his ears, Robb had no idea when he got the title of Lord of the Blood Wolf. However, looking at the excited expressions of the earls, he sighed secretly in his heart and accepted it silently. When he was in White Harbor, Earl Wyman had told him about the general situation in Westeros that he had missed during the month he spent in the Narrow Sea. Renly Baratheon married Marguerite Tyrell, the Rose of Highgarden, in Highgarden, and took the lead in becoming king with the support of the nobles of the Reach and the Stormlands. Later, Stannis Baratheon became king on Dragonstone Island and denounced Joffrey and Renly as false kings, and he was the legitimate heir to the Iron Throne. Robb was elected king at this time, and the timing was right and good, which could play a significant role in promoting the cohesion of the nobles in the north. Thank you, my lord earls, for your trust in me. In the near future, we will definitely overthrow the rule of the false king and gather together before the Iron Throne. Moreover, this time I came back from the south. I deeply felt the poverty of the north. This time when the army goes south, I will definitely bring you with me and will come back with endless wealth from the south, so that our north will become equally prosperous. After waiting for a while with a smile on his face and seeing the shouts gradually disappear, Robb calmly accepted that he had become the king in the north. He thanked all the earls in the north and made plans for a better future. Now, please go to the council hall, everyone. I will arrange my family affairs and come to discuss the matter of going south with you later. Hearing Robb's words, the earls on the parade ground stood up one after another, talked to each other, and walked towards the council hall of Winterfell. Lord Rickard was the last one to stand up on purpose. He approached Robb nervously and asked in a low voice, "Your Majesty, I saw that Eddard looked strange, and I didn't see Torhan." "I'm sorry, Lord Rickard. Torhan died in the Battle of King's Landing." Before Lord Rickard finished speaking, Robb spoke out the statement he had prepared. Ha ha. Although he had some guesses in his mind, Lord Rickard couldn't accept it after it was confirmed and took a few quick breaths. After a little relief, his eyes were a little red and he continued to ask Robb, "That boy, didn't he suffer before he died?" "No, a sword pierced his heart." Robb shook his head and answered truthfully. Lord Rickard, who was somewhat distraught, nodded and whispered to himself, "It's good that he didn't suffer, that's good." At this time, Eddard approached from behind, nodded to Robb gratefully, and then stepped forward to support his father and comforted him. "Father, Torhan's performance in King's Landing is just as you have always taught us. He is like the scorching sun in the winter, fighting bravely until death." Lord Rickard heard this and held his second son's right hand tightly, fearing that Eddard would also leave him. Looking at Eddard, who was supporting his father to the council hall, Robb's evaluation of him in his heart improved a lot again. Eddard had a set of skills in marching and fighting, and he was also very sensible in dealing with people. At that time in King's Landing, he did not speak and begged Robb to spare his brother's life, because he knew that Robb was different from Lord Eddard and would never forgive any betrayal. On the Wind Witch, he sincerely asked Robb to keep the secret that Torhan was a traitor. Robb could still allow such a small thing that could gain the loyalty of his capable subordinates. After getting Robb's consent, Eddard asked each person who knew that Torhan was a traitor to keep the secret for him. No matter what, he can be regarded as a good subordinate, a good son, and a good brother. Without thinking anymore, Robb turned and walked towards Catelyn and her daughter, who were hugging each other. Seeing Robb approaching, the people around Catelyn and her daughter were very tactful and moved away, leaving them enough space. "Mother, I'm sorry. I couldn't bring my father back." Robb walked to Catelyn and whispered with his head down in a guilty tone. When Catelyn heard her son's voice, she let go of Sansa in her arms, sobbed, wiped the tears from the corners of her eyes, turned around and forced a smile. "Robb, this is not your problem. I heard from Sansa that it was your father who wanted to stay. I'm already very satisfied that you can bring Sansa back, and Arya is not in danger for the time being. If I lose them again, I might really go crazy. Mother, I promise you that I will bring Arya back safely in the future." Robb could see the suppressed grief in Catelyn's heart, and he immediately promised to bring Arya back. "Well, I believe you. I always thought you were stronger than Ned. Now, you have lived up to his expectations and become the king in the north." Catelyn reached out and stroked Robb's face. She seemed to see Eddard behind him. After a slight daze, she reacted and continued, "Hurry to the council chamber. The most important thing is to discuss military intelligence with your vassals." "Yes, mother. Then I'll take my leave first and let Sansa accompany you." Robb understood the priorities of the matter. He nodded to Catelyn and turned to Clay and Gendry on the side and said, "Clay, come with me. Lord Midge must have wanted to see you just now. You two should have a good chat later." "Gendry, are you willing to attend this meeting as my squire?" "Yes, your majesty. I do, your majesty." Hearing Robb's words, Clay immediately saluted respectfully in response, and Gendry, who lacked knowledge of etiquette since childhood, looked at Clay's appearance and imitated his response. Robb nodded, turned around and walked towards the council hall with Clay and the others. In the long-missed council hall of Winterfell, under the arrangement of Jory, who had recovered from his leg injury, the noble earls had already taken their seats and were whispering to each other. "Your Majesty." Seeing Robb approaching the council hall, everyone in the council hall stood up and bowed to him. Robb, who was beginning to get used to this title, smiled and nodded in return. He walked to the high platform in the meeting hall and said loudly, "My lords, please take a seat. The topic we are discussing today is the overall plan for this southward march. First of all, please tell me how many troops are currently gathered in Winterfell." "Your Majesty, more than a month ago, we responded to the call to rescue Lord Eddard. In 2 weeks, we gathered nearly 15,000 people. Later, after hearing about the events in King's Landing, each family again allocated more than 9,000 soldiers, and finally added nearly 7,000 people in the Winterfell military camp. Currently, there are a total of about 31,000 northern soldiers gathered in the Winterfell military camp. Since Theon, Little John and others were all in the Winterfell military camp, Robb, who did not know the current specific number of troops, asked directly. As soon as he finished speaking, Ramsay and the crowd immediately stood up and answered with a smile. "Well, more than I expected. Thank you, Lord Ramsay." Seeing Ramsay's active show of goodwill, Robb nodded in response, then suddenly remembered something and continued to say to him, "By the way, since you are loyal to your lord and have taken the initiative to offer the Dreadfort, I would like to ask all the adults to witness that Ramsay Snow, from today on, is Ramsay Bolton. Your Majesty, your loyal vassal Ramsay Bolton will always fight for you, from today until the last day of my life." Hearing that Robb had legalized his Bolton surname, Ramsay was excited, knelt on one knee, and expressed his loyalty loudly. "Very good. I will look forward to you conquering all enemies for me in the next war." Robb nodded and smiled, cooperating with Ramsay to stage a drama of loyalty between the monarch and his subjects. Watching Ramsay stand up and sit down, he continued, "Let me first propose a strategic goal of this trip south. The primary goal is to wipe out the Lannister family and kill the false King Joffrey Hezhan. The secondary goal is to collect the wealth of the south and fill the poverty of the north. Chapter 89 Alliance. Yes, kill the false king. Destroy the Lannister family and rob the gold mines in the westerly. Rob all the southerners. I heard that High Garden in the Reach is the most beautiful castle in Westeros. I really want to rob it." Robb could tell that most of the earls were more enthusiastic about the secondary goals than the primary goals. This was exactly what he could expect. After all, if they only relied on the loyalty and honor of their vassals to fight, it would be fine if everything went smoothly, but when they encountered adversity, various problems would easily arise. But if they were asked to fight, based on their own interests, they would stand firmly in Robb's camp until the last moment. "My lords, if everyone has no objection, then the strategic goal has been determined. Now, can anyone propose a specific tactical plan that we can implement in the near future?" After hearing Robb's speech, the enthusiastic discussions just now suddenly quieted down. "Your Majesty, I think we should contact the Tully family in the Riverlands and the Arryn family in the Vale to form an alliance. Then the three forces will attack the Westerly at the same time, take Casterly Rock in one fell swoop, and then easily take King's Landing." Lord Mitch, whose face was flushed after seeing his son, immediately stood up to support Robb when he saw that the atmosphere was a bit awkward. Lord Mitch's suggestion on forming an alliance is feasible, but I think the plan to attack the Westerly is bullshit. As soon as Lord Mitch finished speaking, a short and fat man with the rough appearance of a northern man, wearing leather armor with a black horned moose family emblem, stood up and shook his head to reject it. "Lord Harris, since you don't agree with my plan, please tell me your perfect plan." Looking at the Horwood family who did not give him face, Lord Harris, Lord Mitch frowned and hit back. This is what Lord Harris was waiting for. He smiled and nodded and said, "Most of the terrain in the westerly territory is undulating mountains, and the eastern border bordering the Riverlands is extremely defensive. As long as the Lannisters station their troops here and hold the Golden Tooth Fortress on the river road, even if all three of us gather our forces, it will be difficult to capture it in a short time. On the contrary, it will be easier to attack from the west, by landing on the west coast over the Sunset Sea. Back then, wasn't that how those squids from the Iron Islands attacked Lannister Harbor? In the council hall, Robb had a thoughtful look on his face as he listened silently to the argument between the two earls, while the other earls listened to Lord Harris's words, and nodded in agreement. Seeing that everyone agreed with him, Lord Harris took a breath and continued, however, we in the north do not have any fleets, and it is impossible to cross the Sunset Sea. Therefore, I think that the Tully family should attack the Golden Tooth, and hold back the Lannister family. We will join forces with the Arryn family, and go straight to the crown, capture King's Landing, and chop off the head of the false king. Then we will pass through the coastal road from the south and capture the less well-defended Crake Hall. Finally, we will capture Lannister Harbor and Casterly Rock, and take the head of Tywin Lannister. Yes, I agree with this plan. As soon as Lord Harris finished speaking, many northern earls nodded in agreement with his plan, which made Lord Midge look very ugly. Looking at his embarrassed father, Clay couldn't help but stand up and asked Robb, Your Majesty, can you allow me to express my opinion? Of course, anyone is allowed to speak at today's meeting. Let's discuss the most reasonable plan together. Robb nodded when he heard this, looked at everyone under the podium, and said loudly, Thank you, Your Majesty. Clay first bowed to Robb, then turned to Lord Harris and said, Lord Harris, if you want your plan to succeed, it must be based on the most ideal situation. Tywin Lannister is a military strategist famous for his wisdom and strategy in the Seven Kingdoms. When the Tullys attacked the Golden Tooth, would he do nothing, and let us, and the Arryns go through the Three Forks area and head straight to the Crown Territory? And even if we could get through, the Crown Territory is now under the control of the Lannisters. If the Lannisters withdraw some of their troops, and go from the Golden Avenue to King's Landing to block us head on, Tywin will lead his troops to break through the Tullys troops and attack us from the rear. By then, we will be caught in the middle, without even a way to retreat. Yes, this kid from the Seven family has a point. After listening to Clay, some earls who were like fence sitters began to agree with his point of view. Watching his son refute Lord Harris's plan, Lord Midge suddenly felt that the embarrassment just now had dissipated a lot. He suddenly had an idea, looked up at Robb, and spoke again. Your Majesty, I suggest sending an envoy to the Iron Islands to invite King Balon to form an alliance with us. If the alliance is successful, we can feign to attack the Golden Tooth City to attract Tywin's attention. Then we will send part of the army to take King Balon's Iron Fleet to attack Lannister Harbor. As for the envoy, I recommend Theon Greyjoy, the commander of the Archers of Winterfell. Hearing Lord Midge's suggestion that he said more than he said, Robb resisted the urge to cover his face and shake his head. However, he was lucky to hit the mark by accident, and he just happened to talk about the goal he wanted to achieve. After Lord Midge and the other person sat down, no one stood up to speak in the meeting hall, and the scene was a bit awkward. Robb nodded and said loudly, Both adults have good opinions, but they are not perfect. Based on your opinions, I will propose a short-term tactical plan. First, regarding the Tully family, I will ask my mother to write to my grandfather. I believe there will be no problem in forming an alliance. The Iron Islands do need to send envoys to seek an alliance. As for the Arryn family in the Vale, there is no need to consider it for the time being. As far as I know, my aunt, Lysa Arryn, has been bewitched by Littlefinger and will not form an alliance with us. Then, the 30,000 troops of Winterfell will reorganize for a few days and then set out to march to the Moat Cailin to set up camp. According to the real-time situation of the war, the next tactical plan will be decided. Does everyone have any opinions? Robb's all-purpose tactical plan actually means that envoys will be sent to form an alliance first, and then take one step at a time. All the earls in the north looked at each other, and no one raised any opinions. Indeed, the plans of Earl Metch and Earl Harris each had loopholes, and they were not to the point where everyone agreed. Seeing that no one raised any objections, Robb nodded and continued, as for the envoys from the Iron Islands, Theon is currently in charge of the training of new recruits in Winterfell, and is temporarily unable to serve as an envoy. Ramsay Bolton, can you please make this trip? I'm willing to serve you, Your Majesty. Hearing Robb calling him, Ramsay immediately stood up and saluted in response. Okay, my lords, Today's meeting will end here first. Please go to the banquet hall and enjoy the dinner together later. By the way, please ask Earl Galbert Glover of Deepwood Mott and Earl Herman Towler of Torrens Square to stay for a while. I want to consult you two about something. Seeing that Ramsay accepted the mission to the Iron Islands, Robb nodded with satisfaction and said, "Yes, your majesty. As you command. Your majesty, we will take our leave first." Except for the two earls named by Robb, the other earls stood up and saluted him to take their leave after hearing this. Thank you Ilyakbt for the reward of points. Thanks to Chuangshi, Miheoshu, Jiang Dong Menghu Sun Shanxiang, Pin K Firan, Yan Shen Kananbing, Chubizhi, Shenxiu Kayanayu, and Wang Ziohui for voting for the monthly tickets. At the same time, thanks to all the big guys who voted for recommendations and followed the reading every day. Thank you for your support. Chapter 90 King's Name, King of the North, Nickname, Bloodwolf Lord. With the choice of all readers, the name of the king has been changed. As expected, your power is the greatest. I checked today, the King of the North is a legal title, and it cannot be changed casually. It can be added in the future, such as the Riverlands, the Trident River Basin, etc., until the whole territory. The previous text has been changed. The nickname of the young Wolf Lord has been changed to the Bloodwolf Lord as Bloodwind emerges. The protagonist's personal achievements are not too outstanding at present, and it is not suitable to add a title. The above is the hard work of typing. Chapter 91 Cleaning Up. The atmosphere of the Winterfell dinner was quite lively. Even though a few people were sad, the overall atmosphere was still joyful and lively today when Robb was jointly promoted as the King of the North. Robb has never been happy about the themed dinner of the rough men in the North. However, as a king, he had to force his smile and cheer loudly for the winner of the drinking contest. However, being able to eat the Chinese cuisine that he had improved was more or less a comfort. Robb, who had been staying in the North, sometimes looked forward to seeing the luxurious dinner of the great nobles in the South and full of beautiful women. The dinner lasted until late at night. These ales were impossible for Robb, whose physique had greatly increased. The servants standing by would help the drunken earls return to their rooms. Robb walked out of the banquet hall and returned to the inner castle with Bloodwind, who was lying at the door and had already eaten and drunk enough. As soon as Bloodwind returned to the inner castle of Winterfell, which he had not seen for a long time, he went straight to his room in the corner of the first floor. Woohoo. Robb, who was walking behind it, suddenly heard Bloodwind standing at his door, uttering a threatening low roar. Robb hurried forward and saw at a glance that Nymeria and Lady were comfortably occupying Bloodwind's den. It turned out that after Bloodwind accompanied Robb south, they were temporarily kept in Bloodwind's room without Arya and Sansa's care. Robb couldn't help laughing, turned his head to look at Bloodwind, and sent a message to it, telling it to rearrange their rooms tomorrow. Just as he was staring at Bloodwind, Robb suddenly found that the bloody words in his vision had changed. Name, Bloodwind. Contractor, Robb Stark. Constitution 30, Speed 30, Strength 30, Clan, Psychic Direwolf 6, Wolf Pack, Soldier Wolf, Nymeria Plus, Servant Wolf, Lady Plus. Blood contract points 67. In the bloody words display, a plus sign appeared after the two names of the wolf pack, just like the attribute. This discovery made Robb, who had 67 blood points and was about to lose control, overjoyed. He immediately tried to choose the plus sign after Nymeria's name. A small red mist rose from Robb's body and directly sank into Bloodwind's body. Then it passed through its transfer and was vacated again and invested in Nymeria's body. Robb could clearly see that the red mist after the transfer was much thinner than at the beginning. Although he could not see the data of Nymeria and the lady, since the blood contract had such a new change, it was just right to solve Robb's urgent needs. He directly invested 30 blood points in each of them, leaving 7 blood points on his body, and Robb felt refreshed. As for Bloodwind, if he could continue to add attribute points in the future, what would he do if he didn't add blood points? Robb, who would soon lead the army south, didn't worry about how to get blood points at all. Just when Robb solved a hidden danger in his heart and was in a good mood, Clay, who was arranged by him in advance, brought the male servant who had fed Bloodwind since childhood. Have you been taking care of Nymeria and Lady for more than a month? After the infusion of the blood contract just now, Robb tried to touch Nymeria and Lady and found that they no longer resisted but began to get close to Robb. He stroked Lady's soft wolf back and asked, "Yes, your majesty, because I have experience in taking care of Bloodwind. So, Lady Catelyn asked me to take care of them." Hearing the question, the servant nodded and answered, "I remember that you took care of Bloodwind from childhood to adulthood. Thank you for your hard work. Do you know Torhan?" Robb nodded, first said a word of thanks, and then changed the subject without any warning. "Lord Torhan? He often comes to the inner castle. I occasionally meet him, but how can we servants have the honor to know him?" The servant was stunned by the question, and then answered very naturally, "There is no flaw at all. You are really a talent. But you are too calm." Looking at the servant's flawless answer, Robb's mind directly sent to Bloodwind next to him. "Abu." Bloodwind growled, and Nymeria and Lady beside Robb suddenly jumped up and rushed to the servant, baring their teeth and growling threateningly at him. "If you don't want to feed them one last time, tell me what I want to know." Looking at the servant, Robb spoke in a calm tone, saying very threatening words. "Your Majesty, if I answer truthfully, can you let me live?" The servant looked at the scene that clearly knew his identity. He smiled bitterly and still answered calmly, "That depends on your answer. If I'm satisfied, not only will you be able to survive, but you will also get a job from me. By the way, what's your name?" "My name is Hal, Your Majesty." Hal, who has served the Stark family for many years and knows the honor of the Stark family, told Robb his name and then began to speak. "Before, I was responsible for collecting intelligence on the Stark family and placing it in a designated location, which was then conveyed by the stable steward who was captured by you. Later, I received instructions to be responsible for the contact with Torhan Stark. He has been providing me with intelligence since you woke up, and I transferred the intelligence through the spies in the Meester Tower. In other words, the spies in the Meester Tower must know where the intelligence was sent." "Yes." "Did you get the intelligence about our military meeting today?" "No, I didn't have a chance to get close, Your Majesty." "Well, I'll tell you now, and you pass the intelligence on." The next day, in White Harbor, in the new castle, the aged Meester Theomer, with his old body bent, hurried towards the Earl's study. In his hand, he held a raven letter. When he pushed open the Earl's study, in addition to Earl Wyman, there were several fully armed guards standing inside, as well as the commander of the White Harbor garrison, Sir Meryn Manderly. "Earl Wyman, there is a raven letter from Winterfell, and I immediately delivered it to you." Meester Theomer did not think too much about it. He raised the letter in his hand and was about to hand it to Earl Wyman. "No need to give it to me. You should have read it. Just read it directly." Earl Wyman, with a serious face, shook his head, indicating that he did not need to hand over the letter. "This letter is very strange. Just one word." "Yes," Theomer said with a strange expression on his face. Earl Wyman nodded upon hearing this, and suddenly asked him, "Master Zyar Mayo, how many years have you been in White Harbor?" "About 30 years, Lord Earl." Zyar Mayo thought for a moment and answered. Hearing his answer, Earl Wyman's eyes showed a look of reminiscence, and he spoke with some emotion. "Has it been that long? Time flies so fast." "Yes, I already have 2 lovely granddaughters. So, in view of your service to our family for so many years, I will grant you a merciful death." Lord Earl, what do you mean by this?" Zyar Mayo trembled upon hearing this, and asked in a trembling voice. "We are all respectable people. You should stop pretending to be yourself. A few days ago, His Majesty Robb quietly told me that there was a secret line of Lannister in the north, and asked me if I had any clues. I immediately told him that you were a very suspicious target. Now, the raven letter in your hand is a confirmation of your identity. Haha, Lord Wyman, you have never really trusted me for so many years." Hearing this, Theomer slowly straightened his bent body and answered. At this time, his voice was no longer trembling. "I can't help it. Who made you born in Lannister Port? I have never had a good impression of Lannister. Mullen, the next step is up to you." "Yes, Lord Wyman." Theomer looked at the White Harbor soldiers approaching him calmly. Fortunately, he had sent the last intelligence by Raven in advance. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 92 Return Home. The next day, Robb received a reply from White Harbor, knowing that Lord Wyman had dealt with Mr. Theamer, and that Mr. Theamer had also sent out the last intelligence. Earlier today, Clay took Hal to the Meester Tower of Winterfell and captured a crow's nest cleaner who was no longer useful. After the two of them confirmed each other, they confirmed that there were no other spies in Winterfell. So far, Robb has finally cleaned up the internal spies. As for the external spies, such as Varys and the little bird, they are like weeds. If you clean up a batch, you will grow another batch. As long as you can't pass on important information, Robb will temporarily choose to ignore it. The information about the servant Hal was told to his brother by Torrhen before he died. Maybe at the last moment, the jealousy and the temptation of certain powers in his heart disappeared, and he wanted to use this information to protect his brother from being implicated in his betrayal. This is also one of the reasons why Robb is willing to help him conceal the secrets of the betrayer. Thinking of what Torrhen said on the South Tower of King's Landing, he kept having the same dream over and over again, and a strange crow appeared in the dream to bewitch him. Robb understood that this must be the disgusting trick used by the three-eyed raven who had trapped him in the dream. Although he didn't understand why the three-eyed raven targeted him so much, Robb made up his mind that it was time to deal with this three-eyed raven who liked to play tricks. In his memory, the three-eyed raven was closely connected with the representative of the faith of the old gods in the north, the heart tree. He had always thought that the heart tree was the weirwood, but after consulting Mr. Lewin, he knew the difference. Although the weirwood was basically extinct after a large number of fellings south of the neck, it was still widely distributed throughout the north. But not all weirwoods can be called heart trees. It must be the descendants of the ancestors who believed in the old gods, through their sacred carving rituals, to carve the weeping blood human face on the weirwood, which can be considered a heart tree that allows believers to pray to the old gods. As the king of the north, Robb could not order the felling of all the heart trees in the north, in order to maintain the stability of his rule. On the Witch of the Wind, he was thinking hard about a solution, and he remembered a small mistake in his previous life. Garlem. In the kitchen of the inner castle of Winterfell, Gendry was stirring with a large iron spoon, and the large pot of steam was constantly coming out. Because he wanted to make some attempts, Robb had already sent all the kitchen servants away. Your Majesty, do you want to continue adding it? Wiping the sweat on his face, Gendry turned to Robb and asked. Keep adding. Hearing Robb nod in response, he used the iron spoon in his hand to scoop a large spoonful from the wooden basin, filled with large white particles beside him, and added it to the large pot. Watching Gendry constantly adding coarse salt to the pot, Robb's mind emerged with the scene of his mistake in his previous life. That time, he accidentally used the high concentration salt water, which was the same as water, to water the flowers. As a result, in just 2 days, the flowers and plants withered and died. So, he thought that, although the heart tree was a little special in this world, as long as it was still a plant, it should have an effect. Until the coarse salt block was thrown into the boiling pot, and could no longer melt. Robb called Daisy, who was guarding outside the kitchen, and asked her and Gendry to quietly pour the pot of high concentration salt water all over the roots of the thick heart tree and the godswood of Winterfell. If, after a few days, the effect is obvious, then Robb will let the selected guards kill all the known heart trees in the north in this way. I haven't returned to Winterfell for more than a month, and there are many accumulated government affairs that need to be handled by Robb. Before that, he first counted and distributed the pensions of the 16 Winterfell cavalrymen who died in King's Landing. Each survivor received a pension of 2 gold dragons, and their names were included in the warriors' tombs, so that the survivors could enjoy corresponding preferential treatment. Only 2 gold dragons were given, not because Robb was stingy, but because this was enough for the survivors to live for a long time. More would not be a good thing. In this era, without power to match wealth, wealth can be a disaster. The Earls of the North have gone to the Winterfell military camp to make the final preparations for the army and prepare for the South. Robb, who was unable to go to the military camp because of some pre-war planning, asked Clay to take his handwritten letter and ask Theon and other generals to make pre-war preparations according to the plan. When Robb was in the meeting hall, discussing with Master Luwin what emergency measures to take to expand the battlefield rescue team into a formal system, Jory, who has always been very calm, stumbled into the meeting hall and reported loudly as soon as he saw Robb, "Your Majesty, Lord Eddard, is back." On the Winterfell parade ground, the dusty Yoren, with the reserve night watch team, was standing silently with his head bowed. When Robb and Jory hurried to the parade ground, the rest of the Stark family had all arrived. Looking at the dilapidated wooden coffin on the transport carriage, Catelyn bit her lip tightly, and tears flowed down her face. Sansa and Rickon burst into tears. Brandon, who was carried by Hodder, had a rational and indifferent expression on his face, as if he was used to seeing the separation of life and death. Robb walked a few steps to the wooden coffin, and stretched out his hand to open it. Seeing this, Yoren, who was standing beside him, stepped forward and whispered to him, "My lord, your majesty, you'd better be mentally prepared." After saying this, Yoren looked in the direction of Catelyn and Sansa. "Robb, open it. Let us see him one last time." When Robb heard Yoren's words, he was hesitating whether the family behind him could bear it after opening it, and then he heard Catelyn say to him in a firm tone, "Click." Hearing his mother's words, Robb pushed open the dilapidated wooden coffin with one hand. It took more than a month from King's Landing to Winterfell, although Yoren had done antiseptic and insect-proofing treatment for Eddard's body on the road. But Eddard's body was still unrecognizable, and only his former appearance could be vaguely distinguished. This was due to the fact that the further north you go, the colder the temperature becomes. Robb took a deep breath, calmed down, turned to Catelyn, who was staring at Eddard's body, and Sansa, who couldn't bear to close her eyes beside her, and said, "Mother, I will ask someone to repair my father's face and body. Then, hold a funeral for him." "No need, Ned doesn't like these things. We will hold a funeral for him here, and let him go directly to the family crypt." Catelyn heard this, staring at Eddard's body with tears in her eyes, and shook her head to reject Robb's proposal. Indeed, Eddard was not a person who liked grand ceremonies. At the beginning, he thought the Hand of the King tournament held by Robert for him was expensive and useless, and wanted to cancel it. Robb had no time to thank him at this time, and Yoren, who had sent the body back from a long distance, could only nod to him. Then, relying on the strength of his own hands, he carried Eddard's coffin alone, and walked towards the crypt of Winterfell step by step. Catelyn and others followed Robb closely, walking towards the crypt with heavy steps. Behind them, Yoren looked at the family leaning on each other tightly, and murmured, "Lord Eddard, you are home. Thank you Jinzioyanari for the 3,000 point reward. Thank you Wanyesi for the 200 point reward. Thank you Jinzioyanari, Wangziohari downstairs, Hangalan Bay, and the Snowflake Elves, and I don't miss the big guys, vote for the monthly ticket. At the same time, thank you for all the big guys who vote for recommendations and follow the reading every day. Thank you for your support." Chapter 93, Mission, Goodwill. Ramsay stood at the dock of Torrhen Square. Earl Herman of Torrhen Square was beside him and wished him well. "Earl Ramsay, I wish you a smooth journey on this mission. When the war is won, we will drink together to celebrate." Earl Herman, "Thank you for escorting me all the way." "Haha, then it's an agreement. Let's drink together then." Ramsay showed his unique and charming smile and nodded in response. Torrhen Square is on the edge of the big lake southwest of Winterfell, only 2 riding days away. On the day Ramsay accepted the mission, Earl Herman led his troops to escort him and sent a raven letter in advance to contact the merchant ship heading to the King's Port on Pike Island. After Ramsay finished speaking, he turned around and boarded a small merchant ship with sails waiting for them at the dock with a dozen of his followers. After the merchant ship set sail, Ramsay waved goodbye to Earl Herman. Turning around, his warm smile suddenly became cloudy. Alan, his capable attendant beside him, took the initiative to ask, "My lord, your Bolton surname has been legalized by the King of the North, and he values it, and has obtained an important mission to the Iron Islands. Why don't you look happy?" Hearing this, Ramsay shook his head and said, "Legalizing my surname was originally the content of my deal with him. He is taking this opportunity to announce to the northern nobles that, as long as they have made contributions to him, he will definitely give corresponding rewards. And this mission to the Iron Islands is not as simple as you think. Logically speaking, if he really wants to conclude an alliance with Balon Greyjoy, then Theon Greyjoy, as a hostage, is the best person to show his sincerity, not me. At this point, Ramsay turned his head and looked in the direction of Winterfell and continued, he doesn't trust me. This time, the 1,000 new soldiers I trained with great difficulty are under his reasonable control. The Dreadfort and that damn Sam have been restraining me. My lord, then, what should we do? Of course I will try my best to complete this mission. It will take almost half a month to go back and forth. Then we will see whether the King of the North can win all the time. Or, King's Landing, the throne room of the Red Keep. Joffrey, who had held his coronation ceremony a month ago, wore a golden crown inlaid with rubies and black diamonds, a king's casual clothes embroidered with gold thread, and played with an exquisite crossbow in his hand. Cersei, who was officially promoted to the Queen Regent, sat on the right side one level lower than him, and Jaime, who had resigned from the King's Guard and had the King's hand brooch on his chest, sat on the left side. Sandor, who was promoted to the King's Guard, and Meryn and other King's Guard stood up and guarded behind them. Your Majesty, we received intelligence today that Robb Stark was elected as the King of the North by the northern nobles in Winterfell, following Renly Baratheon and Stannis Baratheon. Under the Iron Throne, Varys reported the intelligence he had just received to Joffrey in his unique soft tone. Damn it, these traitors should all be chopped up and fed to the dogs. As soon as Varys finished speaking, the hot-tempered Joffrey immediately cursed. Alas, Jaime, who was reluctant to resign from the King's Guard, but was persuaded by Cersei to do so, sighed in his heart for his son's temper, turned his head, and said to Joffrey loudly, Your Majesty, there are now 3 traitors who have claimed to be kings, and we happen to be in the center of these 3 parties. The most important thing now should be to win more loyal lords who can submit to you. Well, Prime Minister is right. Do you have any good suggestions? Seeing that Joffrey didn't want to use his brain at all, Jaime shook his head secretly and continued, the Tully family in the Riverlands and the Arryn family in the Vale have always been one with the Stark family. The Tyrell family in the Riverlands and the nobles in the Stormlands all support Renly, and Stannis has the Florent family and the royal fleet of Dragonstone. Therefore, the only one we can fight for now is the Martell family in Dorne. Prime Minister, may I have a word? As soon as Jaime finished speaking, Baelish below suddenly spoke. Seeing Jaime nod in agreement, he continued, Lady Lyssa of the Vale and I grew up together and have a very good relationship. If you are willing, I'm willing to go to the Vale to persuade her to submit to the true king. Okay, Baelish. If you can make the Vale submit to me, I will reward you with a castle as a fiefdom. Joffrey was very happy to hear Baelish's words and immediately made a generous promise to him. Thank you for your generosity, Your Majesty. I will do my best to persuade her. However, your reward for Lady Lyssa's submission. Baelish heard this and immediately bowed to Joffrey to thank him and then continued to speak. However, at the end of his words, he turned to Queen Mother Cersei who was sitting quietly beside him. Haha, Lord Baelish, if the Arryn family can send troops to help us and defeat all the traitors, then the entire vast north can be taken by her. At the same time, her son, Robin Arryn, will get a seat in the royal council. Cersei knew that Baelish was waiting for her to express her opinion. She smiled on her radiant face and said, will the Vale send troops to help? I don't think it's likely. As far as I know, some of the Vale nobles have always wanted to join the Stark family camp. I think that Lady Lyssa can suppress them and remain neutral, which is a merit for His Majesty. How could the smart Baelish agree to Cersei to persuade Lyssa to send troops? He said with a smile. Lord Baelish, please set off as soon as possible and go to persuade Lady Lyssa. No matter what the final result is, your contribution will be remembered by His Majesty and rewarded. Jaime spoke directly and finalized the matter. Yes, Prime Minister. I will set off for the Vale tomorrow. Lord Baelish, please come to Meagher's Tower later. I have a small matter to trouble you. Yes, Your Majesty. Late at night, at the Blackwater port, a short man wearing a black cloak stood quietly facing a medium-sized flat-bottomed merchant ship by the river. After a while, A woman with long red hair and a good figure came to the man, supporting a mother holding a baby, and said, "Lord Baelish, me and the child are here." Hearing the voice behind him, Baelish turned around and smiled. "Rose, thank you. You can go back first." Rose, a skilled maid who came to King's Landing from Winterfell and was valued by Baelish, nodded to him and turned to leave. "Lord Baelish, are you telling the truth? Will the Queen Regent kill all his illegitimate children?" Seeing Rose leave, Maeve, who was holding Robert's illegitimate daughter, whispered to Baelish, "Of course it's true. That's why I'm so anxious for you to leave. Take the child to her uncle. He will protect you. By the way, remember to pass the secret letter I gave you to His Majesty Stannis." Baelish replied with a serious expression. "Then what if we leave, and the Queen Mother blames you? Didn't you notice that a mother and daughter moved into your room again today? Don't worry about me, just leave." Okay. Baelish watched Maeve board the merchant ship and gradually move away. He turned and left, heading for the next location. That night, Baelish sent two of Robert's illegitimate children, one to Dragonstone by sea, and the other to Highgarden via the Rose Avenue. What went with them was Baelish's kindness to the two kings. The next day, in King's Landing, a large number of gold cloaks were dispatched to hunt down Robert's illegitimate children throughout the city. Chapter 94, Expedition. A few kilometers east of Winterfell, near the newly built military camp, the army of the Northern Vassal is stationed outside the military camp. These thick military tents stretch for several kilometers. Today is the day set by Robb to go to war. All the soldiers are tidying up the military tents and preparing for the expedition. Your Majesty Robb." Robb rode the majestic Bloodwind from Winterfell to the newly built military camp. As soon as he stepped into the area of the surrounding military tents, the soldiers in the area immediately stopped and saluted him. They looked at the huge direwolf under Robb, their eyes full of awe and fanaticism. Sam's newly established intelligence agency has begun to play a very important role. Now, most people in the north believe that Robb is the messenger of the old gods who can control such a terrifying giant wolf. In addition, the earls of each family conveyed to all the soldiers under their command what Robb said, that he would take them to rob the endless wealth of the Southerners. Now they are boiling with fighting spirit and can't wait to go south immediately. Robb smiled and nodded to the soldiers all the way until he entered the military camp. Only then could he relax, his cheeks stiff with a smile. But as soon as he entered the military camp, he found that the earls of the north were already waiting in front of the high platform of the military camp. Behind them, Theon, Little John and other generals of Winterfell, as well as the generals under the command of each earl, were all in line. And behind these generals at all levels, there were nearly 7,000 direct troops of Winterfell standing in neat rows and quietly in military posture. He could only put on a smile again on his face. Robb sent a message to Bloodwind in his heart, and it immediately changed from strolling to charging. Rushing to the high platform of the military camp, Robb jumped lightly with his limbs and landed heavily on the high platform. Your Majesty. The earls in front of the high platform saw Robb in place and immediately bowed their heads to salute. Then, the whole military camp was filled with the loud cheers of nearly 7,000 soldiers. My lords, my brothers in the north, thank you all for responding to my call. The king we once served, Robert Baratheon, and the Duke of Winterfell, Eddard Stark, were all murdered by the Lannister family who had been plotting for a long time. This time, we will lead the army south, and we will completely eradicate the Lannister family and kill the false King Joffrey Hezhan. I believe that any enemy that stands in the way of this goal will be torn to pieces by you warriors in the north. After the shouting in the camp gradually stopped, Robb spoke loudly. Because the camp was wide, the soldiers in the back row would definitely not be able to hear the speech, so the more careful Owen arranged dozens of loud-voiced soldiers in advance, one every few rows, to convey Robb's speech to the back. Woo! Kill them. Tear them apart. As soon as Robb finished speaking, the soldiers below began to roar in various ways. Robb was quite satisfied with such high morale. He raised his hands high and signaled everyone to be quiet. Although they couldn't hear what was said, because they were far away, all the soldiers could see Robb's gesture, while he was standing on the high platform riding Bloodwind, and they quickly quieted down. At the same time, we will also borrow the enemy's wealth to build our homeland this time, when we go south. Let the North become richer and let us live more comfortably in the future. Finally, fellow Northern brothers, you don't have to worry about your families. All the brothers who died bravely in this southward journey will be counted in the warrior's vault, and your families will be properly taken care of until the Stark family is extinct. Long live His Majesty Robb. I'm willing to fight to the death for His Majesty Robb. Fight to the death. As soon as Robb finished speaking, all the soldiers shouted excitedly again. In their opinion, if it was really as Robb said, then those who could come back alive from this southward journey would not only have a good life for the rest of their lives, but they might have no worries about food and clothing for several lifetimes. Even if they died in battle, their families would receive a large pension and basic living security, and these security would last until the Stark family was extinct. You know, as a family with thousands of years of history, in the eyes of the Northerners, the Stark family is as old and reliable as the Wall. The Wall will not fall, and the Stark family will not perish. Therefore, at this moment, the soldiers in the barracks are as fanatical as if they were brainwashed by pyramid schemes. The movement of the barracks made the soldiers of other families around the barracks very curious. Robb's words were slowly conveyed from the barracks, and gradually the area of several kilometers of military tents was full of shouts for Robb to fight to the death. Snap, snap. A team of infantry with newer equipment and more orderly formations marched forward in high spirits, and the Earl in charge and his generals rode beside them. At this moment, they passed by the east gate of Winterfell, and marched towards the King's Road at the south gate. In front of the east gate, there were civilians watching the excitement. They looked at the seemingly endless queue, discussing loudly, and stretched their necks to see if there were people they knew among them. Hey, these are the soldiers of House Severn, and that's their family's silver battle axe flag. Wow, Arwen, you know so much. So impressive. Young man, tell me about the other soldiers. Among the civilians, a young man who followed the caravan through the entire north was showing off his knowledge. The girl next to the young man looked at him with admiration, and the other civilians next to him urged him to continue. The trident male mermaid flag is House Manderley, the green jungle black bear flag is House Mormont, and the broken chain roaring giant flag is House Amber. Hey, I didn't see the 3 sentinels of House Towelhood and the steel fist flag of House Glover. Don't be surprised, I saw a large group of soldiers walking along the King's Road a few days ago. They must be the vanguards arranged in advance by the nobles. Look, the soldiers of House Stark are coming. These civilians watched the queue passing through the east gate tirelessly. Just as they were discussing, the Winterfell direct troops with the direwolf flags at the end of the team came. Crack, crack, crack. The direct troops of Winterfell marched forward in a uniform pace. Unlike the troops of the northern earls who whispered to each other during the march, there was no other sound, except the sound of footsteps and the collision of mail. A solemn and murderous atmosphere came over them. The civilians who were talking about it subconsciously shut up and kept quiet. Shield soldiers, spearmen, sword-wielding infantrymen, archers. More than 4,000 Winterfell infantrymen passed quickly through the east gate in neat and silent order. Ta 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 ta. Nearly 2,000 light cavalry controlled their horses and marched in neat formations. 500 heavy cavalrymen, like tin cans, followed them and appeared in the civilians' field of vision. If the infantry gave them a solemn and murderous feeling, then these cavalrymen gave them a feeling of iron and blood. At this moment, they seemed to see the bloody storm set off by these cavalrymen charging the enemy. Behind them, the civilians saw King Robb of Winterfell riding a giant direwolf with cold eyes and murderous aura. There were 2 direwolves on the left and right sides, which were only half the size of the giant wolf, but were equally murderous. Watching them walk past him, Arwen swallowed a big mouthful of saliva, and said in a slightly trembling voice, "Oh my god. I don't think anyone can stop His Majesty Robb's army and his giant wolves." Thanks to 0 Degree Ice and Fire 1 for voting for the monthly ticket. Thanks to all the big guys who vote for recommendations and follow me every day. Thank you for your support. PS. Today the editor has confirmed that it will be available on the 1st of next month. In fact, I'm a part-time coder and I really don't have any manuscripts saved. I will not go anywhere this weekend and work hard on coding. Chapter 95. War begins. When Robb rode Bloodwind past the south gate of Winterfell, Catelyn, Sansa, Brandon, and Rickon were watching him from afar. Robb, who had said goodbye last night, looked at them and did not leave the team to go forward alone. Your Majesty, go and say goodbye to Lady Catelyn. Theon rode beside Robb. He looked up slightly and asked, no need. According to the time, the logistics troops should have arrived at Moat Cailin, right? It must have arrived. After this period of contact, I found that Trog always completes things ahead of time. Hearing Theon's answer, Robb nodded. After Torhun died, Robb promoted Trog, who performed well in the Battle of the Dreadfort, to the commander of the logistics troops. Adhering to the principle of the ancestors, that food and fodder should go first, he was asked to take food and fodder and go ahead in advance to Moat Cailin to build basic fortifications. Gendry, how is the task I asked you to tell Daisy? Robb turned his head and asked Gendry, who was not very good at riding and twisting his body behind him. All those things have been handed over to her, and she is selecting the right person. Well, very good. After the saltwater test a few days ago, the heart tree of the Godswood forest in Winterfell suddenly lost a lot of leaves these days, and withered visibly. This matter was discovered by the servants, and reported to Catelyn, but she didn't know why the heart tree suddenly withered, and there was no way to save it. She just thought that the withering of the heart tree might be due to Ed's death. After all, it was related to the faith of the people in the north. After Gendry prepared a large amount of high concentration salt water, Robb asked him to inform Daisy to carefully select personnel and act quietly. If nothing unexpected happens, in less than a month, the heart trees in the wall will all wither and die. As the marching column moved forward, Winterfell was gradually left behind. Abu, Nymeria and the lady, who had gathered together at some point, suddenly growled at each other. Robb quickly sent a message to Bloodwind and separated them, each on the left and right sides of Bloodwind. After the last investment of 30 blood points each, Nymeria and Lady did not grow as fast as Bloodwind did in the past, and their bodies still maintained their current appearance. However, it was obvious that the two of them were more restless than before, disliking each other, and would growl to warn each other when they got a little closer. Moreover, they obviously liked to get closer to Bloodwind more than before, constantly harassing it, which made Bloodwind very annoyed. Robb, I heard that you sent Ramsay to Pike Island to seek an alliance with my father. After all, you killed his father, and he probably won't help you with your heart. In fact, you should let me go, and the success rate will be higher. My father is a very stubborn person, which is a bit like Lord Eddard. Theon and Robb gradually fell behind the army. Seeing that there was no one around, he called Robb affectionately. Hey, Theon, you are the commander of the archers in Winterfell. If you leave, how can I fight this war? Don't worry, no matter whether Ramsay is sincere or not, the final result will be the same. Hearing Theon say that he should go to Pike Island, Robb smiled and looked at him, and answered, well, it should be no problem to form an alliance. My father is not senile yet, and he should understand the benefits of the alliance between the two sides. Indeed, without my help, your war will definitely not be so smooth. If I make the first contribution this time, you have to reward me with a large fiefdom. Theon, who was not very scheming, didn't hear the meaning of Robb's words at all, and laughed and joked. Robb nodded at him and replied meaningfully, Theon, you can make the first contribution. I promise to let you sit on the throne of the King of the Iron Islands. Haha, that's my position. You are so stingy to reward me with my things. Hearing this, Theon rolled his eyes at Robb, thinking that he was also joking. After saying that, he glanced at Nymeria, who had been harassing Bloodwind, and asked, Robb, did you feed Nymeria and Lady something special? Something special? It's the medicine I like to use every time I go to see a prostitute. How is that possible? Then they look like they are in heat. But don't wolves usually go in heat in late winter? It hasn't even started to snow in summer yet. In heat. Robb heard this and looked down at the two direwolves beside him and had some guesses in his mind. The Golden Tooth City is located in the mountains of Tengshi Mountain, right on the river road leading into the west. At this moment, on the river road at the foot of the mountain, there are hundreds of thick and spacious military tents stationed, and thousands of soldiers wearing shining armor are sitting around enjoying lunch. The flags in the military tents are divided into two parts. One is the flag of golden rings and golden eyes and a black dragon on a white background, and the other is the flag of a girl with a white silk ribbon. in the center of the military camp, in a luxurious tent that was twice the size of an ordinary tent. Two commanders wearing armor that matched the family crest on the flag were drinking and talking. It is meaningless for Lord Edgemere to send us to cut off the river road this time. The Seven Kingdoms have been at peace for 10 years. Anyone who dares to start a war easily will become the target of condemnation by all the nobles. Earl Vance, what do you think? A commander took a sip of wine and said to the Earl Vance he was talking about. Earl Piper, you are right. Although there are several kings now, it is all a game of interests for the great nobles. When they get enough benefits, they will live the good life again. But now we have to work hard. Alas. Earl Vance agreed with the view of Earl Piper on the opposite side. At the end, he shook his head and sighed. Haha, we can be considered to have found some fun in the hard work. Cheers. Cheers. Boom. As the two of them were toasting, a sound like thunder came into their ears. The sound of thunder gradually grew stronger, and finally it was like ringing in their ears. Enemy attack. It was not until the soldiers outside the luxurious tent shouted loudly that the two stunned earls reacted. They immediately dropped their wine glasses and rushed out of the luxurious tent, looking up in the direction of the sound to observe the situation. They saw a Lannister cavalry unit, like a black venomous snake, swimming down from the mountain where the Golden Tooth City was located. The cavalry at the front was about to approach their temporary military camp. Pick up your weapons and quickly form a defensive formation. After Earl Vance reacted, he immediately shouted and ran to the front, organizing his soldiers to defend. And Earl Piper, seeing that the situation was not good, quietly called his guards and asked them to prepare horses to escape. To be honest, these two earls are really military geniuses. Not only did they station their temporary military camp at the foot of the flat river road, they had not even thought of sending out scout cavalry to monitor the enemy situation. The Lannister cavalry, commanding the enemy, accelerated fully from the mountain and rushed straight to their temporary camp with the greatest impact. Chapter 96, Bay of Callan. Boom. The Lannister cavalry, like a tiger descending from the mountain, rushed straight into the defense line that was barely formed under the shouting of Earl Vance with the sound of horse hooves like thunder. Squeak. The Lannister cavalry in the front row clamped the iron lances tightly under their armpits, carrying a strong impact force, easily piercing through the panicked Riverland soldiers. The moment the two sides came into contact, blood immediately splattered on the defense line of the Riverland soldiers, opening the prelude to a cruel war. The iron lances of some Lannister cavalry penetrated the chests of the Riverland soldiers, and under the force of the horses' charge, they continued to charge forward alive. And some unlucky Riverland soldiers were hit directly in the face by the sharp lances. Under the strong impact, their heads were either pierced off alive, or their entire heads exploded instantly, turning into headless corpses. Behind the lancers in front, the light cavalry armed with swords and shields followed the passage that their comrades had rushed out, waving their long swords and ruthlessly harvesting the lives of the Riverland soldiers. Keep the formation and stop them. At the end of the Riverland soldiers' formation, Earl Vance rode on a warhorse brought by a guard, looking at the army formation that had been pierced through most of the time, and shouted anxiously. Earl Vance encountered a cavalry raid and personally organized his family soldiers to form a defensive formation to resist. His courage was commendable. However, war is not decided by his courage alone. The Lannister cavalry, who had the advantage of time, place, and people, easily tore the formation of the Riverland soldiers apart. Before the formation was torn apart, Earl Vance, with all the guards around him, bravely went against the current of this steel torrent. Swish. A Lannister cavalryman's lance pierced the chest of the warhorse under Earl Vance's crotch, and the warhorse's front legs softened on the spot and fell to the ground with him. Rip. Luckily, Lord Vance did not fall off his horse and die. He just stood up with a dizzy head and wanted to check the battle situation. A Lannister light cavalryman swung his long sword and cut most of his neck. Hot blood gushed out of Lord Vance's neck. The more than 2,000 Riverland soldiers on the battlefield were basically soldiers from Lord Vance's family. Lord Piper had gathered thousands of soldiers from his family before the battle began. When he saw that the formation organized by Lord Vance was easily torn apart by the Lannister cavalry, he was about to collapse, so he hurriedly rode his horse and led his troops to flee. This temporary military camp was now trampled into ruins. Some of the Riverland soldiers who were seriously injured, but not dead, were stabbed by the Lannister cavalry while screaming. Kevin rode his warhorse and strolled in the ruins of blood and wailing. A middle-aged general beside him, wearing armor with a purple unicorn family emblem, asked, "Lord Kevin, about 1,000 enemy troops fled to Reborn when the battle started. Most of them are infantry. If we set out now, we can catch up in half a riding day." "No need. These soldiers of the Tully family set up camp at the foot of the mountain without any defense. It's like fat meat delivered to our door. Since we have eaten this piece of fat meat, if there is an ambush ahead, we will lose more than we gain. Lord Andros, this war is of great importance. We must be careful." Hearing this, Kevin shook his head and rejected Lord Andros's suggestion. Lord Andros, the Lord of Horn Valley, knew that Kevin never had his own opinions. He must have meant that Lord Tywin meant this, so he nodded and didn't say anything more. "Continue to clean up the battlefield. When the infantry arrives, we will go outside Reborn, station and surround it, and cut off the Tully family support for the Stark family. Then, I will follow Lord Tywin's plan and lead the troops to go there at night." Located at the northern end of the neck, which is covered by wetlands and swamps, Moat Cailin was once a large fortress consisting of 20 towers. After being washed away by the power of time, it has now become an abandoned fortress with only 3 towers left. But regardless of ancient and modern times, the strategic location of Moat Cailin is quite important. It guards the causeway that allows the army to pass through the neck safely, making it a strategic place for guarding the north and facing the invasion of the south for thousands of years. When Eddard was in the Black Prison, he once said to Robb that, as long as they defended Moat Cailin and White Harbor, the Lannister family would never be able to set foot in the north. This is not empty talk. The 3 remaining towers in Moat Cailin just control the only causeway to the north from 3 directions. To attack one of the towers, the enemy army must wade through waist-deep black mud, cross the moat infested with lizard lions, and then climb the slippery walls covered with moss. As long as a few hundred archers are deployed on these 3 towers, no army can forcibly climb the towers under the rain of arrows from the archers on the other 2 towers. However, this is all for entering the north from the south. Since it was originally built to defend against attacks from the south, it is much easier to attack from the north. After 7 days of marching, Robb's northern army arrived at the Cailin Bay, which is currently occupied by Trog, the logistics commander of Winterfell. As Theon said, Trog is very serious and responsible. When their army arrived, the logistics troops had cleaned and maintained the 3 towers of Cailin Bay and built some fortifications nearby. The arrival of more than 20,000 northern troops not only filled the 3 tower areas, but also covered the King's Road in the north and south of the causeway with military tents. Robb rode on a black warhorse, looking at this fortress that has protected the north for thousands of years, while conveying his thoughts to Bloodwind in his heart. At this time, the logistics commander Trog drove up and invited him to a tower called the Gate Tower. The Gate Tower is one of the 3 remaining towers in Moat Cailin. It is the only tower that looks relatively intact at present, and there are even several feet high walls on both sides. This tower should be the residence of the King of the North and the meeting hall for discussing war. The ancient gate tower is now very clean. Trog has specially arranged it to make it more comfortable and more suitable for living. At a long table that was obviously recently made, Robb and all the earls except the Dreadfort, Deepwood Motel, and Torham Square Fort sat down, and the generals at all levels stood behind them. First, he praised and encouraged Trog, and then Robb went directly to the formal meeting. While Robb and others were discussing, less than 20 kilometers northwest of Moat Cailin. This is a river in the Neck Marsh, called the Heatwave River. Its mouth is at the Salt Spear Beach, and further ahead it leads directly to the Sunset Sea. At this moment, a longboat similar to a kayak in the previous life, was paddled to the shore by several ironmen wearing grey leather armor and leather pants, and carrying long swords. As soon as they got ashore, they quickly lifted the longboat, and moved it to a more secluded location. Using the surrounding branches and other debris to cover the longboat, they sneaked towards the direction of the Bay of Callan with a very clear goal. Thank you for the reward of the coins from the Will of the Cinder King, and thank you for the monthly votes from KCYKC, JCCG 1008, Yaleo30, Chevali, Bookfriend 150,512,112,408,359, Beefenkilling, and Never Say Die Yuan. Thank you for your recommendation votes and all the great people who follow me every day. Thank you for your support. Chapter 97 Meeting. Moat Kaelin, in the City Gate Tower. After Clay returned to Winterfell, under Robb's arrangement, he was responsible for connecting with the intelligence agency established by Sam. As soon as Robb announced the start of the meeting, he immediately stood up and loudly reported the current general situation of the war. According to the intelligence just received, the Lannister family launched a full-scale attack along 3 routes 7 days ago. Kevin Lannister led an army of about 15,000 people and defeated about 4,000 Riverland soldiers at the foot of the Golden Tooth. Afterwards, he led his troops along the river road and headed straight for Reborn. Now he has set up camp outside Reborn and besieged the Tully family. Tywin Lannister led an army of nearly 20,000 people and set out from the Golden Road to eliminate the Riverland strongholds along the way. When this intelligence was sent out, he was attacking Pink Castle. With his troops, he should have successfully broken the city, and Gregor Clegane led about 1,000 cavalrymen to kill, burn and loot everywhere in the Riverland. Whether it was a village or a town, he razed them all to the ground. Didn't I write to my uncle a long time ago, asking him to gather the vassals in Reborn and wait for us to meet up before going out together? After hearing Clee's report, Robb tapped the long table with his right index finger in a rhythmic manner, frowning and asking, "Yes, but it is obvious that Lord Edgemere has his own ideas and did not adopt your opinions." Clay nodded and answered Robb helplessly. "Map?" Robb whispered to Gendry beside him. As his attendant, Gendry immediately spread the map in his arms on the long table of the meeting and placed the wolf head and lion head symbols in the corresponding positions. "My lords, what should we do next? Does anyone have any opinions?" Seeing Gendry finish spreading the map, Robb nodded to thank him, and then asked the Northern Earls at the long table of the meeting, "Your Majesty, we should immediately march south and attack Kevin Lannister's army. By then, Lord Edgemere will surely attack from Reborn. We will attack from both sides, and will surely annihilate them." After these few days of Eddard's company, Lord Rickard has gotten over the pain of losing his son. Hearing Robb's question, he immediately stood up, pointed to the map on the table, and told his plan. "Yes, I think so too. Lord Rickard is right. After dealing with Kevin's army, we can join forces with the Tully family's army to deal with Tywin's army together." "I agree." As soon as Lord Rickard finished speaking, most of the Northern Earls nodded in agreement with his opinion. "Then how do we get to Reborn?" Robb did not express his agreement or disapproval, but just raised another question. "The fastest way, of course, is to go from the Twins through the Green Fork and then go straight down to Reborn." Hearing his question, Lord Magi, who had not had time to express his opinion just now, immediately stood up gracefully, saluted Robb first, and then expressed his opinion. A middle-aged man with a goatee, who was about the same height as Severn, handsome, stood up and retorted, "Walder Free will not let us pass through the Twins easily. If our more than 20,000 troops are calculated, based on his bridge toll, it will be a fee that the entire North cannot afford." "Lord Holland, you are wrong. Now is not like usual. Reborn is besieged by the Lannisters. Lord Walder is a vassal of the Tully family. If we go to rescue his lord, he will definitely not charge us for the bridge toll." Lord Magi obviously did not know Walder Free and answered according to the inherent thinking of the North. Howland Reed, a rare earl in the North, responded to Robb's call for some unknown reason. He chuckled and replied, "You underestimate this late Lord Free. He is far more greedy than you think. Once, Lord Eddard took us to participate in the uprising of King Robert, and he asked us to collect bridge tolls. The Free family has always strictly maintained neutrality. Without huge benefits, it is impossible for them to side with one party. Then let's take the King's Road, pass the intersection near the Three Forks River, and turn to the River Road." Seeing that Earl Howland was so sure, Earl Mech hesitated and said another way. "If we take this road, let's not talk about the time it takes to take a detour. Just from the route Tywin Lannister took to capture the city, we can see that he went straight to the crossroads. It is estimated that when we arrive, they will have already lined up to wait for us. Earl Mitch's old rival, Earl Harris, finally got the chance and immediately stood up to refute. Seeing that his views were refuted, Earl Mitch, who was often targeted by Earl Harris, rolled his eyes and simply sat down without saying anything. We must go through the twins. This is the best solution. But we can't afford the bridge toll. However, half of the army will go through the twins and the other half will go through the King's Road. After Earl Mitch sat down, many northern earls talked about it and discussed solutions. Why think so much? We can just march directly to the border. If the Free family won't let us pass, we can just flatten their twins. Listening to the noisy discussion, the fierce-looking Regent frowned, stood up suddenly, and ended their argument with a single sentence. It's impossible. Lord Eddard also considered this issue. We carefully surveyed it at the time. The twins are easy to defend, but difficult to attack. The stone towers on both sides are full of arrow holes and killing holes, and there are thick and solid iron gates at both ends of the bridge. If we really want to take the twins, I'm afraid we can only find a way to break it from the inside. Hearing the words of the Gregian, Lord Howland, who knew a lot about the twins, shook his head and rejected it. You can't do this or that here, Lord Howland. Do you want to watch Reborn fall? The Gregian raised his eyebrows and glared at Lord Howland, who had been rejecting it. Ahem. Alright, please be quiet, my lords. Seeing the tense atmosphere, Robb coughed, calmed down the situation and continued. Since Reborn is under siege, we must go south as soon as possible. So we have basically decided on the marching route, which is to pass through the twins and head straight to Reborn. Lord Nori, please set off for the twins immediately and negotiate the bridge toll with the Free family in my name. We will set out tomorrow and head straight to the twins. We have to cross this bridge if the Free family allows it. Even if they don't allow it, we must cross it. Yes, Your Majesty. As soon as Robb finished speaking, the taciturn Lord Nori, who was behind the long meeting table, immediately stood up and saluted to receive the order. Okay, after 7 days of marching, I believe everyone must be very tired. Let's stop here for today. Yes, Your Majesty. Seeing Robb set the plan, the Earl saluted and left. Chapter 98 Negotiation. Everyone in the conference hall had left. Theon, who stayed behind, asked, Robb, Lord Nor of the Mountain Clan is usually taciturn and has no idea of noble etiquette and negotiation skills. Why don't I go with him? I'll help you negotiate the twins and get the Free family to join our camp. Looking at Theon, who was sincerely advising him at this moment, Robb smiled and said, No, you have to stay with me. Without you to help me make suggestions, I can't make up my mind about many things. As for sending Lord Nor, don't worry, I will naturally consider it. Well, it's good that you have considered it. Don't worry, I will definitely give you more suggestions. Hearing this, Theon nodded and replied with great satisfaction, and then continued to ask, just now I wanted to ask, since we are in a hurry and the infantry troops are marching slowly, why don't we set off immediately today and wait until tomorrow? When Robb heard Theon's question, he fixed his eyes on a corner of the map on the desktop and replied softly, because I'm still waiting for some guests, and I want them to see the majesty of our army. Guests? Someone here in Moat Cailin wants to find out about our military situation? Robb, do you want me to take some people to find them? No, Bloodwind is helping me keep an eye on them. Well, it's no problem to have him watching them. No wonder I didn't see Bloodwind today. By the way, what did the Kennel Master in Severn say about Nymeria and Lady? When Theon heard Robb say that Bloodwind was watching them, he nodded in relief and continued to gossip. Ha, Theon, you are indeed experienced. Nymeria and Lady are indeed in heat, and they should have been sent back to Winterfell now. Although there are no other dire wolves in the north, there are also many large grey wolves. I have arranged for people to capture them in the wolf forest. Robb chuckled and spoke to satisfy Theon's curiosity. After Theon's reminder, he left Nymeria and Lady in Severn when the northern army passed through Severn, and the Kennel Master there observed them. After a few days of observation, it was indeed proved that they were in heat. Although Robb didn't know why investing 60 blood points into them didn't increase their size, but their sexual desire. However, in some ways, it was a good thing. Because he still remembered how shocking it was when Emilia last saw Arya with a group of large blood relatives. Hey, reserve one for me in advance, one of their wolf cubs. I also want to raise it to be as big as Bloodwind, and then ride it out majestically. Looking at Theon with a face full of longing, Robb smiled and didn't burst his dream. The next morning, the horn representing the departure sounded in the camp of the Northern Army. The nearly 26,000 troops still lined up in a long line and headed south along the King's Road. On a small mound not far from the Moat Cailin, the Iron people who came from the Heatwave River were staring at the Northern Army. When the Northern Army had completely left the Moat Cailin, one of the Ironborn said, "There are almost 25,000 people. Shall we report to King Balon now?" "No, follow them and report after they leave the neck. This is safer." Another Ironborn shook his head to stop them. Yes, I don't want to be punished by King Balon because of a mistake. Yes, it's better to be safe. After discussing, several Ironborn quietly followed the Northern Army and headed south. Far behind them, Bloodwind cleverly hid his huge body and used his supervision to keep a close eye on these Ironborn. The twins are composed of a pair of castles standing on both sides of the Green Fork River. Together, they guard this cross-river bridge that has made the Free family rich and powerful for hundreds of years. Earl Nor, who accepted the mission of the King of the North, traveled lightly with several guards and galloped all the way. In less than 5 days, they arrived in front of the twins. After informing the guards at the gate of their purpose, they did not have to wait long before a servant led them into the twins to meet Lord Walder Free. Lord Walder was an old man with sparse white hair, loose skin, and a shrewd and cunning appearance. He was already 90 years old this year. Because of the long-term troubles of gout, he sat on a black oak chair and looked at Earl Norrie, who entered the reception hall. "Lord Walder, I'm an envoy sent by the King of the North. Our 30,000 northern troops want to pass through the bridge of your twins. Do you allow it?" When he was in the Mountain Clan tribe, the people were always tough and used force to speak. Therefore, Earl Norrie did not understand the etiquette of the nobility at all. He did not say a word of courtesy when he came up and directly stated his purpose. When Lord Walder saw Lord Norrie speak directly without any etiquette, his eyebrows slightly raised, but his face did not show a trace of dissatisfaction. Instead, he smiled and said, "Of course the King of the North can pass through our twins. However, for hundreds of years, anyone who wants to cross the bridge must pay us a bridge toll. This is just like paying for something. It is the most basic principle in Westeros. How much does it cost?" Lord Norrie, who had experienced the meeting at the Bay of Cailin, of course knew that he had to pay a bridge toll. He nodded and asked directly. 10 gold dragons per soldier, so 30,000 people would be 300,000 gold dragons. What? Lord Walder had just finished speaking lightly, and Lord Norrie immediately shouted in surprise. Although the Norrie clan often dealt with Winterfell, they were geographically remote and had no resources. It was difficult for the entire clan to come up with more than 10 gold dragons. Now hearing Lord Walder asking for 300,000 gold dragons, he simply couldn't imagine it. Haha, let me think about it. War only happens once every 10 years. In this special period, the bridge toll cannot be calculated at the usual price. Seeing that Lord Norrie's face was getting uglier and uglier, Lord Walder explained first, then changed the subject and continued, "Of course, the King of the North can pay the bridge toll in another way." "What method?" Lord Norrie asked immediately after hearing his words. "Swear to the 7 gods in the sky, and your old gods, that after the war, he will marry one of my daughters. And let one of his sisters marry one of my sons. In this way, not only will all of you be able to cross the river, but our Free family's army will also join him." Lord Walder smacked his lips twice and spoke slowly, stating his conditions. "This, I can't decide. I have to go back and report to the King in the North." "Of course, come on, send this messenger of the King in the North out." Lord Walder looked at Earl Norrie, who turned around and followed the guards out of the banquet hall and couldn't help cursing in a low voice. What a northern barbarian who doesn't know etiquette. Haha, the old gods, they believe in our primitive nameless gods who don't know etiquette. Unlike our 7 gods, the Mother is a kind god who raises and teaches the world. Kevin Lannister, who was supposed to be besieging Reveron, actually walked out from the left passage behind Lord Walder at this moment, and continued Lord Walder's words with a smile. Thanks to Cheyenne Chi and Usher Shell, Wolf King Hades, Book Friend 2020222204919432, Early Bird, Dead Soul, Book Friend 202004190751187889, July S. Book Friend 2021080406493855. 0 Degree Ice and Fire 1, and my huge big guys for voting for the monthly ticket. Thanks to all the big guys who voted for recommendations and followed the reading every day. Thank you for your support. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 99 Encounter. Sir Kevin, are you sure Lord Tywin will agree to the conditions you promised me? Lord Walder heard Kevin's words and asked in a deep voice without turning his head. Of course, I swear in the name of the 7 gods. The promises I made to you were all allowed by Lord Tywin. If it weren't for his plan, I would still be besieging Reveron now. How dare I come to visit you with my troops? Upon hearing this, Kevin immediately nodded seriously to confirm. I'm glad that he agrees. The little trout who gave me the nickname Late Lord Free and humiliated me for a whole 10 years will finally get the revenge he deserves this time. Lord Walder nodded, thinking that he could finally untie the knot in his heart, and a smile appeared on his face. In fact, you could have directly asked Robb Stark to come in person and swear an oath. In this way, we could have captured him directly. No, that would arouse their suspicion. Although the Duke of Eddard, who was famous throughout the 7 kingdoms, is dead, the little wolf cub he taught was able to lead the army to defeat Rose Bolton, which is already very remarkable among this generation of young people. As a qualified king, he will not put himself in danger. Marquis Walder shook his head and explained to Kevin. More than a month ago, he and the giant wolf risked their lives to mess up King's Landing. Maybe, at that time, he was not a qualified king, but a child who wanted to save his father. I'm a little worried that Reveron will find out that most of your troops have left and go out of the city to attack the troops you left behind. Also, those soldiers on the south bank must be hidden well. There is only one chance. If the people of the north find out, I'm afraid unexpected changes will happen. Don't worry, Marquis Walder, Edgemere Tully is a cowardly fool. After I killed more than 2,000 of his soldiers in Golden Tooth, I went straight to Reveron and there was no resistance at all. I left 2,000 people running around in the camp to create an illusion. He doesn't dare to leave the city now. As for the more than 10,000 soldiers hiding in the woods on the south bank, they have been eating military rations these days and there is not even a fire. I guarantee that the people of the north will not find them. Hearing his words, Kevin immediately nodded and made a promise, then continued, according to Lord Tywin's plan, when half of their troops have crossed, you will close the iron gates on both sides of the bridge. They will be in a panic by then. We will annihilate the troops on the south bank, and Lord Tywin will annihilate the troops on the north bank from the King's Road. Finally, we will deal with the troops on the bridge. This time, we will annihilate all 30,000 people in one battle. I don't think it's likely. Their troops on the north bank will find it a trap and retreat to Moat Cailin for defense. Even if you join forces with Lord Tywin, you won't be able to pass through Moat Cailin and enter the north. Having lived for 90 years, Lord Walder has experienced many battles and still has good judgment. Hearing this, Kevin did not continue to answer, but just smiled meaningfully. Now that we are here, let me ask you again, Robb Stark, if you don't agree to my terms, what about my Luan River City? Haha, he will come. This is all part of Lord Tywin's plan. Well, that's good. Well, Sir Kevin, let me treat you well. By the way, you can also help Jaime Lannister choose a wife. I have a daughter who looks very good. Haha, okay. When Robb met Lord Nori, the Northern Army had already passed the Grey Water Watch of the Neck and was stationed at the intersection of the King's Road that separates the twins. In Robb's military tent, when Lord Nori reenacted the process of negotiating the bridge toll with Lord Walder, Robb fell into thought. Lord Nori, you've made a long trip. Please go and rest. Robb, who had recovered from his shock, saw Lord Nori still standing in front of him waiting, and he immediately smiled and thanked him. After Lord Nori left, Theon teased Robb with a playful smile. Robb, I don't think you need to consider it. Accepting the marriage will not only give you an extra wife and thousands of soldiers, but you can also pass through the twins. What a great thing. Unless you don't like the marriage. I'm not opposed to the marriage, but my position as queen is not worth just one free family. Robb shook his head and didn't say much to Theon. He changed the subject and asked, Little John and Eddard, did you go out to scout the situation ahead on the King's Road? They did go, but Lord John felt too bored recently, so he went with them. Ta ta ta. On the King's Road near the Green Fork, Big John, Little John, Eddard and hundreds of cavalry were galloping happily. In the past half month of marching from Winterfell, there has not been a single battle, which made him feel very depressed. John, persuade Lord John. We are on a reconnaissance mission, not here to relax. Eddard, who had been unable to persuade Big John from the beginning, rode closer to Little John and said, My father is a stubborn man. He won't listen to what I say. Don't worry, he knows the importance of things. He will just run forward a little bit and then stop. Little John shook his head and answered helplessly, Enemy spotted. While the two of them were talking, the cavalryman following Big John suddenly shouted. Eddard and the others heard the voice and looked forward immediately. They saw that in front of the King's Road, there was a team of cavalrymen with nearly 100 people, wearing the obvious Lannister family armor. The number is about the same as ours. Follow me. Big John looked at the Lannister cavalryman whose number was not much different from his own, excitedly drew his sword directly, waved forward, and gave the order to charge. John, don't. Alas. Eddard looked at Little John, who was following his father's charge, and didn't listen to him at all. He sighed heavily, drew his long sword, and followed them to charge. Lannister also found that Great John and others wearing the standard mail armor of the North were also charging fearlessly. On both sides of them were lightly armed scout cavalry, without lances, crossbows and other weapons, and even without a one-handed shield. They only relied on a long sword to engage in close combat. Clang. Tear. Great John, who was at the front of the Northern cavalry, was indeed famous for his ferocity and bravery in the North. In a face-to-face encounter, he directly pressed down the opponent's cavalry's longsword with his longsword and raised his hand with the second sword to directly cut the enemy's neck. Little John was better than his father. At the moment of contact with the Lannister cavalry, although the opponent had blocked his longsword, his powerful strength still pushed the opponent off the horse. Wow. The fight between the other cavalrymen was not a one-sided crush like this. A Northern cavalryman and a Lannister cavalryman collided heavily, and the two poor war horses fell softly with a wail. The cavalrymen on their backs struggled to get up from the ground and raised their swords to fight each other. The physical fitness and fighting will of the Northern cavalryman were better than those of the Lannister cavalryman. The Northern cavalryman had half of his chin cut off by his opponent's sword during the fight, but he still swung his sword hard and chopped his opponent to the ground despite the injury. But the armor and weapons of the Lannister soldiers were more sophisticated than those of the Northern cavalryman. Just when the Northern cavalryman thought he was lucky to survive, the Lannister soldier on the ground suddenly turned over and sat up, stabbing the lower part of the Northern cavalryman with a sword. Ha ha ha. The Lannister soldier, who had defended against the opponent's fatal slash with his excellent armor, stood up and smiled foolishly, as if he had survived a robbery. A Northern cavalryman saw this obvious target, rode past him on horseback, and also chopped off his head. On the King's Road, the Northern army came into contact with the Western army for the first time. It was like a microcosm of the war that would inevitably happen in the future, with blood splattered everywhere, and flesh and limbs flying everywhere. This group of Lannister cavalry could not stop the charge of Jon and his son. They saw that the Northern cavalry, under their leadership, gradually divided their own side. A Lannister cavalry captain saw that things were not going well. After cutting down a Northern cavalryman, He immediately pulled the reins, turned his horse's head, and ran while shouting, "Retreat, retreat quickly." The encounter between the two cavalrymen lasted less than 10 minutes from the contact to the end. Only half of the Lannister cavalrymen were left, and they hurriedly fled to the south of the King's Road. "Mercy, mercy." A young Lannister cavalryman who was injured and fell off his horse, but was not dead, was raising his hand to beg for mercy. Swish! A northern cavalryman suddenly stabbed down his long sword, piercing his palm and stabbing into his neck. There is no mercy on the battlefield, not to mention that they are scout cavalry. They don't need too many prisoners, just a few alive. This is the first victory of our northern army in the south. Let's go back and ask for credit. The bloody Great John saw the northern cavalry clean up the battlefield, laughed loudly, and rode north. Eddard, with a cold face, and Little John, with a helpless expression, followed closely behind. Chapter 100 Iron Race. Your Majesty, we killed 47 Lannister cavalrymen and captured 2 prisoners. We are now interrogating them. As soon as the Great John returned to the Northern Army's camp, he took Eddard and Little John and went straight to Robb's tent while reporting the good news loudly. On the left side of the tent, Bloodwind, who had not appeared for a long time, raised his head lazily, glanced at Eddard and the other 2, and then lay on the ground to take a nap again. After the Big John, the Little John and Eddard entered the tent, they found that Robb and all the Northern Earls were looking at them with serious faces, and they obviously felt that the atmosphere was not right. "Lord John, what are the orders I gave you?" Robb did not ask the Great John about the specific battle situation, but directly asked about the orders he had issued before. "Manage your own soldiers, and prepare for war." The smile on Lord John's face disappeared, and he stood still, and answered in a deep voice. "Disobeying the king's order, and leaving your post without permission, do you admit your guilt? There is not even a rabbit in this broken place who would come to attack. I led the warriors to kill the enemy bravely, and won military merits. Is this a crime?" Hearing Robb's words, the hot-tempered Great John immediately retorted loudly. Bang! His words directly ignited Robb's anger. Robb slammed the table in the king's tent, stood up, and shouted loudly, "We are marching and fighting. Do you think we are playing a game? You want this, he wants that. Who do you listen to? What do you need me, the King of the North, to do?" The Great John was about to continue to refute, but the Little John and Eddard rushed forward from behind, knelt on one knee in front of Robb, and said in unison, "Please punish me, Your Majesty." Cavalry commanders, John Umber and Eddard Stark, failed to complete the task as ordered. Each of them will be punished with 20 military sticks. "Thank you, Your Majesty." Upon hearing this, Eddard and the others immediately bowed their heads and accepted the punishment willingly. "Lord John, I'll ask you again, do you know your crime?" After punishing the 2 close subordinates, Robb's eyes returned to the Great John again, and he asked in a cold tone, "I have made contributions to the North by killing enemies. I'm not guilty, I don't admit it." The fierce and terrifying face of the Great John was full of dissatisfaction, and he shouted directly at Robb. "Ha ha ha, very good." Hearing the words of the Great John, Robb suddenly laughed, but everyone in the king's tent could hear the chill in his laughter. Woo! The Bloodwind at the door felt Robb's intention, and his huge head appeared at the door of the king's tent. The wolf's mouth let out a low roar before attacking, and his eyes full of murderous intent stared at the back of the Great John. The Great John didn't look back at all, but he, who had experienced many battles, instantly felt the extremely dangerous warning behind him, and his hair stood up instantly. He couldn't help, but slowly reached for the long sword at his waist with his right hand. In the king's tent, it seemed that the air suddenly condensed, and it was in a tense state of swords being drawn. Robb paced to Gendry, who was holding ice, and with a swish he drew out his greatsword ice, and said, "Lord John Umber of Last Hearth disobeyed the king's order, deserted his post, and refused to admit his mistakes. In the name of the king in the north, I will execute him according to military law. Your Majesty, please be merciful." Before Robb finished speaking, Lord Rickard, who had made arrangements in advance and was waiting for this moment, suddenly stood up and said loudly, "Lord John is determined to kill enemies for the north, and has absolutely no intention of disobeying the king's orders and violating military law. Please let him owe you a life, and make corresponding contributions in this war to make up for it." Yes, yes, although he made a mistake, Great John should not be beheaded. Lord John, admit your mistake to His Majesty. Your Majesty, please forgive Lord John for his disrespect. Lord Rickard's words immediately resonated with the other Northern Earls, and they all spoke up to plead for Great John. Your Majesty, please forgive my father's mistakes. Little John knelt down in front of Robb, pleading loudly for his father, and turned to Great John and said, "Father, you have violated military law, so admit your mistakes." Great John looked around the royal tent, and saw that everyone, including his son, was winking at him. He slowly retracted his right hand, lowered his head, and knelt on one knee in front of Robb, saying in a deep voice, "Your Majesty, I was wrong. Please let me make up for my mistakes with military merits. Since all the adults have asked for my mercy, and Lord John has admitted his mistakes, then this military law will be remembered first, and when Lord John has made military merits in this war, it will be offset." Seeing that Great John finally gave in, and admitted his mistakes, Robb put the ice in his hand back into the scabbard in Gendra's hand and said loudly. As soon as he finished speaking, Bloodwind at the door lazily lay back again, and the tense atmosphere in the king's tent disappeared instantly. Hearing Robb's resignation, most people in the military tent breathed a sigh of relief. Great John was an extraordinary warrior and a fierce general who charged into battle. Without him, the Northern Army would have lost its combat power before the battle even started. Theon, who had been watching Robb from the side and taming these lax Northern Earls, and who admired him in his heart, said at the right time, "Your Majesty, Earl John and his men killed nearly 50 enemies and captured prisoners this time, so they should be rewarded." Well, of course the reward will not be small. Just like the punishment, remember first, if you can get effective information from the prisoners, the reward will be doubled. "Thank you, Your Majesty." The Northern Earls did sincerely submit to Robb, but the North has always advocated heroism, and they basically dealt with some of Robb's seemingly insignificant orders in a perfunctory manner, which was quite lax. After the Great John established his authority in this incident, they began to take military law and discipline seriously, which will play a significant role in Robb's future command of war. Pike Island, Pike City, in the long hall of the main castle. Ramsay, who had arrived in Pike City and had been left out for several days, was finally brought to the long hall by a guard. When he saw King Balon, this man with sharp eyes and long grey hair draped over his thin back was sitting on a strangely shaped huge stone throne that looked like a giant black and shiny sea monster. Standing beside him were several Ironmen, both men and women. Ramsay Bolton, the Earl of the Dreadfort in the north, is here to greet King Balon, the plunderer king of the Sunset Sea. Ramsay, who knew when to advance and when to retreat, bowed his head and greeted King Balon very politely, giving him enough face. "Put away your hypocritical etiquette. We Ironborn are different from you bitches from the Greenland. If you have something to say, just say it directly," Balon said to Ramsay bluntly. Ramsay, who had his head buried, had veins on his forehead popping out, and his expression was very gloomy. But when he raised his head, his face was full of smiles. He continued to speak, as if nothing had happened. "As expected of an Ironborn, you speak and act decisively. The King of the North, Robb Stark, wants to sign an alliance with you. Together we will attack Lannisport and Casterly Rock from the Sunset Sea. As long as you can wipe out the Lannister family, you will be the king of the Iron Islands in the West." Ha 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 ha. Hearing Ramsay's words, Balon immediately laughed, and the whole long hall was filled with his laughter. After Balon had laughed enough, he spoke. What he said is very similar to Tywin, but Tywin, the bitch, promised me king of the Iron Islands in the north. By the way, do you know why I didn't call you here until today? I don't know. Ramsay still had a smile on his face and shook his head. My people told me that the little wolf has led the Northern Army out of the neck, and soon, there will be no king in the north. Lord Balon, what do you mean by this? Ha ha ha, you Stark boy, you still want to plot against Tywin. Long before you set out, you had already fallen into the trap set by Tywin. Kevin Lannister and Walder Free are lying in ambush at the Twins, and Tywin Lannister is blocking the King's Road. As long as I follow Tywin's plan and send troops to take Moat Cailin, the 20 or 30,000 northern soldiers will all die outside the neck. Balon spoke out Tywin's plan loudly without any scruples, then shook his head and continued. However, I don't need anyone to give me a crown. I will take what I want myself, and I will pay with iron money. This is our ancient tradition. This is the fundamental reason why we call ourselves Iron Race. Thanks to Lin Mao and Cinder King, Will for their coins, and to Ladderheart, Dreamback to Azareth, Heyo Daosu, a Red Wolfer, and Pink Fleeing Man for their monthly votes. Thanks to all the people who voted for recommendations and read the book every day. Thank you for your support. PS. After a month and a half, this book will be available tomorrow. Thank you to all the readers who have read this far. Please continue to support this book. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.